Tonight, we begin a journey into the quiet wisdom held within the hands of those who work with purpose. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply allow your breath to soften, feeling the gentle rise and fall of your chest. If this path of peaceful discovery calls to you, I invite you to subscribe, allowing these stories to guide you deeper into rest. Let us explore the quiet strength found in transformation. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now, feeling the air fill your lungs, and then release it slowly, completely. Deep within an ancient forest, where the pines stood tall and the earth smelled of damp leaves, lived a man named Nakul. For many years, Nakul had been a charcoal burner, his days spent carefully stacking wood, covering it with earth, and setting a slow, controlled fire. He knew the secrets of the heat, how to coax the wood to transform, not to burn to ash, but to become a pure black charcoal. It was a craft that required patience, understanding, and a deep respect for the elements. Yet, as the years passed, Nakul felt a quiet weariness settle over him. He watched the smoke rise from his mounds and wondered if his own passion, once so bright, had also slowly turned to ash, useful, but no longer a flame. The forest itself was an old soul, its canopy a vast, shifting mosaic of green that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Here, the air always carried a deep, earthy scent, a blend of decaying leaves, fresh pine needles, and the subtle, lingering perfume of wood smoke that clung to Nakul's simple, dark linen clothes. His robust build, accustomed to the heavy labor of felling trees and moving logs, moved with a quiet efficiency honed by decades. His face, often smudged with ash, was etched with the lines of sun and wind, and his strong hands, ingrained with the dust of wood, bore the undeniable marks of his craft. His eyes, though weary, held a deep, contemplative gaze, always watching, always absorbing the slow, deliberate pulse of the forest around him. Nakul's work was a testament to transformation. He would select the wood with a knowing touch, choosing only the densest, most resinous logs. Pine with its quick, eager flame. Oak, slow and steady. Maple, sweet and clean. Each type of wood held its own character, its own way of yielding to the fire. He would stack them meticulously, forming great conical mounds, a pyramid of potential energy. Then, with an almost reverent care, he would cover these stacks with layers of damp earth and turf, sealing them almost completely, leaving only a few small vents for the smoke to whisper out. It was a delicate balance, this art of denial, of stifling the hungry flame just enough to bring about a deeper change. Too much oxygen, and the wood would simply burn to ash, useless dust scattered by the wind. Too little, and it would merely smolder, half transformed, heavy with unburned resins. But precisely the right amount of air, precisely the right heat, precisely the right length of time, and the wood would yield its essence, becoming charcoal, black, brittle, and intensely potent, ready to bring warmth to homes and fire to forges. In the early years, the work had filled him with a fierce joy. The first lick of flame, the sight of the smoke beginning its slow dance from the vents, the smell of the wood's transformation. It had been a thrill, a deep connection to something primal and powerful. He felt like a guardian of fire, a midwife to change. But as the seasons turned, as countless mounds rose and fell, a subtle shift occurred within him. The thrill had faded, replaced by a quiet predictability. The joy had cooled, settling into a familiar routine. He still executed his craft with flawless skill, his movements precise, his judgment unerring, but the spark, The inner flame that had once drawn him to the heart of the forest seemed to have dwindled to a dull ember. He would sit for hours, watching the wisps of smoke curl upwards from his mounds, a silent testament to the hidden fire within. Blue smoke, thick and pungent, meant the process was just beginning. White, lighter smoke indicated the moisture was leaving the wood, and the thin, almost invisible haze, sweet and woody, signaled the heart of the transformation. He could read these signs like ancient texts, understanding the language of the heat. But what language could he read within himself? What signs indicated the state of his own internal fire? He felt only a quiet sadness, a sense of loss that he couldn't quite name, a void where the vibrant passion used to reside. His voice, when he spoke, was deep, like the crackle of embers, often expressing his doubts as observations about his craft, rather than direct laments about his soul. The heat, he might murmur to the rustling leaves, or to a curious squirrel. It is a strange thing. It can consume or it can transform, but sometimes it merely warms without igniting. He yearned for that ignition again, that sense of aliveness that had once made his work feel like a sacred calling. He began to experiment, quietly, almost desperately, seeking to rekindle what he felt was lost. Perhaps the wood itself held the key. He would gather different species, venturing further into the ancient groves. He tried the light, airy willow, hoping its quick burn might translate to a quicker spark within him. He tried the dense, slow-burning ironwood, thinking perhaps a deeper, more enduring heat was what he truly sought. He varied the ratios, mixing hard and soft woods, observing the differences in the smoke, in the feel of the mound, in the final yield of charcoal. Each experiment was a quiet prayer, a hopeful offering to the forest, to the fire, to his own dwindling spirit. He altered the burning times, allowing some mounds to smolder for days longer than usual, pushing the boundaries of tradition. He shortened others, hoping for a swift, intense transformation. He would watch the vents with an almost obsessive focus, adjusting the airflow minute by minute, trying to coax a different kind of fire, a different kind of charcoal, a different kind of feeling within himself. He experimented with the shape of his mounds too, making some taller and narrower, others wide and flat, believing that perhaps the geometry of the process might influence the geometry of his soul. He learned new subtleties of heat distribution, new ways to manage the slow internal cook. But the quiet weariness persisted, a subtle discord beneath the surface of his mastery. The charcoal he produced was always excellent, always consistent, always useful. The villagers relied on his skill, knowing that Nakul's charcoal would burn true and clean, providing the perfect heat for their cooking fires, their smiths' forges, their winter hearths. He was respected, his craft valued, but within him, the sense of quiet desperation grew. He brought warmth to others, but felt a chill in his own heart. He produced pure, potent charcoal, but felt his own essence was becoming dull, predictable, useful, but no longer aflame. As the sun dipped below the ancient pines each evening, casting long, peaceful shadows across the forest floor, Nakul would sit beside his mounds, the faint scent of smoke mingling with the cool night air. The crickets would begin their nightly chorus, a distant owl would hoot, and the gentle sigh of the wind would whisper through the trees. He would listen to these timeless sounds, feeling the pulse of the forest, and wonder if the vibrant, leaping flame of his initial passion had truly died, or if it had merely transformed into something else, something deeper, something less visible, but perhaps in its own quiet way, just as powerful. He did not know. He only knew the yearning for the spark, the seeking for the fire, continued within him, a quiet, persistent ache in the heart of the ancient wood. The evening air, usually so still and fragrant with pine, began to stir. A cool breath, distinct from the usual forest breeze, rustled through the canopy, carrying with it a distant scent of damp earth, a promise of rain. Nakul, sitting by his mounds, felt the shift, a subtle change in the very fabric of the air, and looked up at the sky. The stars, usually a brilliant tapestry above the trees, were now obscured by a thickening veil of cloud, dark and heavy, gathering silently, patiently. The gentle sigh of the wind grew louder, becoming a low moan, a prelude to something vast and powerful. He knew these signs. He knew the forest, and he knew that a heavy, driving rain could be a charcoal burner's worst enemy. Water, seeping into the carefully constructed mounds, would cool the slow burn, extinguishing the precious heat, halting the transformation, turning his carefully chosen wood not into potent charcoal, but into a ruined, soggy mess, heavy and useless. The thought sent a jolt through him, a sudden, sharp awareness that cut through his quiet weariness. He rose to his feet, his movements quickening with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. The first fat drops of rain splattered onto the broad leaves around him, dark circles blooming on the forest floor. He could hear the distant rumble of thunder now, a deep growl echoing through the ancient trees. He had to act, and quickly. He moved with a speed born of instinct, his hands, usually so deliberate, now a blur of motion. He snatched up his shovel, a heavy, worn tool that felt like an extension of his own arm. The wind picked up, whipping through the pines, sending branches swaying, tearing at the edges of his earthen mounds. The rain began to fall in earnest, a sudden torrential downpour, drumming loudly on the leaves, turning the forest floor to slick mud. Nakul ran from mound to mound, a solitary figure battling the elements. He scooped wet earth, packing it against the vulnerable edges, reinforcing the fragile seals, trying to create an impenetrable barrier against the relentless deluge. He dragged fallen branches, piling them strategically, hoping to divert some of the flowing water. His breath came in ragged gasps, mingled with the drumming rain, his clothes soaked through, clinging to his skin, heavy and cold. Water streamed from his hair, blurring his vision, but he did not stop. He worked with a singular focus, a fierce, primal urgency to protect the hidden fire, the slow, precious transformation happening within the earthen shell. His muscles ached with an intensity that pulled him fully into the present moment. There was no room for quiet sadness now, no space for contemplation of lost sparks. There was only the immediate, desperate need to protect, to preserve, to save. He pushed against the wind, against the rain, against the seeping dampness that threatened to undo weeks of careful labor. He risked slipping on the treacherous mud, risking exhaustion, risking the cold that began to seep into his very bones. Yet, he continued, moving with a furious, unyielding determination. He felt the cold, hard mud on his hands, the sting of rain in his eyes, the deep ache in his shoulders and back. He felt the sheer weight of the effort, the physical toll it took, and as he shoved another armful of damp leaves and earth against a vulnerable vent, a profound realization began to dawn upon him. It was not a sudden flash, but a slow, gentle unfolding, like the quiet unfurling of a fern after the rain. He was soaked, shivering, utterly spent, yet he was driven by something powerful. This raw, protective energy, this relentless drive to shield his work from harm, this desperate, unyielding battle against the elements, this was passion. It was not the leaping, visible flame of his youth, the eager crackle of new beginnings, the bright, thrilling spark he had yearned for. No, it was something deeper, something far more enduring. A steady, unwavering heat that resided not in a visible flame, but in the very core of his being, in the fierce care he held for his craft, for the transformation he facilitated. His passion hadn't died. It had matured. It had transformed, much like the wood within his mounds. It had become less dramatic, less outwardly apparent, but infinitely more solid, more resilient, more essential. It was the enduring warmth of an ember buried deep, protected, radiating a steady heat that could sustain and transform rather than merely consume. He realized that the quiet weariness he had felt, the sense of a dwindled spark, was not an absence of passion, but simply a misunderstanding of its new form. He had been looking for a flame, when his passion had become the deep, steady heat of the charcoal itself. The rain, as if acknowledging his new understanding, began to lessen, softening to a gentle drizzle. Then, to a quiet drip from the leaves, the thunder faded into a distant grumble. Exhausted, Nakul leaned against one of his mounds, feeling the subtle warmth radiating from within. A testament to the fire he had protected, a mirror of the steady heat he now felt within himself. He closed his eyes, allowing the cool, clean air to wash over his face, a quiet sense of peace settling in his heart. The next morning, the forest was reborn. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the fresh scent of damp earth and renewed pine. Sunlight filtered gently through the still wet leaves, spilled golden across the forest floor, illuminating droplets that clung like jewels to every branch and blade of grass. Nakul returned to his charcoal mounds, his body still aching from the night's battle. But his spirit lightened, his eyes seeing with a new clarity. He walked among them, his movements no longer burdened by weariness or the quiet desperation of seeking. He checked the vents, saw the steady, thin wisps of smoke curling upwards, a quiet affirmation of the successful transformation within. He touched the damp earth of the mounds, feeling the gentle, radiating warmth beneath his palms. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his charcoal was safe, that the process had continued, uninterrupted. And in that knowing, he also knew that his own fire, his own passion, was safe. It was not lost. It had simply changed its nature, from a youthful, leaping flame to a deep, steady, enduring heat. It was less about the dramatic ignition and more about the quiet, persistent tending. It was less about the visible glow and more about the invisible, unwavering warmth that permeated his craft, his hands, his very being. He saw the quiet strength in this transformed dedication, a strength that had allowed him to battle the storm, to protect what he deeply valued. His work was still precise, his judgment still unerring, but now, each movement was imbued with a quiet reverence, a profound appreciation for the enduring, transforming power he held, and the enduring, transforming passion within his own heart. The forest, still dripping, seemed to hum with a newfound harmony, a quiet echo of his own internal peace. This story shows us how passion can transform. Nakul discovered that true caring doesn't always manifest as a visible flame, but can become a steady, enduring warmth. Buddhism teaches that change, or anicca, is constant, and our connection to life adapts. When we embrace the evolving nature of our passions, we find deep, lasting meaning. Now let us take a gentle breath together, feeling the air fill your lungs completely. And as you release it slowly, completely, allow your body to soften, settling deeper into rest. As you rest, feeling the quiet rhythm of your own breath, Allow your mind to drift like a leaf on a gentle current, moving towards a different landscape, a new journey of quiet wisdom. Let us turn our attention now to a different path, a different pair of hands, and a different kind of quiet struggle. In a village nestled beside a slow-moving river, where the sun warmed the clay walls of the homes and the air carried the scent of dust and distant cooking fires, lived a young woman named Priya. Her days were spent in a rhythm as ancient as the river itself, a dance of balance and movement, a quiet service to her community. Priya was a water carrier, a skilled and graceful presence on the winding paths that connected the village well to the homes scattered through the fields and along the riverbanks. Her frame was slender, yet possessed a surprising resilient strength, honed by years of balancing heavy clay pots upon her head and shoulders. Her movements were fluid, almost flowing, as if she herself were made of water, a living current moving through the landscape. Each morning, as the first light touched the highest branches of the ancient banyan tree by the well, Priya would begin her rounds. She would walk to the well, its stone lip worn smooth by generations of hands, and fill her pots. The water, cool and clear, would gurgle and sigh as it poured from the bucket into the rounded vessels, a sound as familiar to Priya as her own heartbeat. With a practiced, elegant motion, she would lift the filled pots, settling one perfectly balanced upon a padded ring on her head, another cradled gently in the crook of her arm, perhaps a third held by a steady hand. Then, with a soft exhalation, she would begin her journey. Her steps were light, almost soundless on the dusty paths, a testament to her years of careful practice. She moved with an innate grace, her spine straight, her gaze steady, navigating the uneven ground, the occasional rock, the small roots that sometimes broke through the soil. She knew every dip and rise of the paths, every shaded patch, every sun-drenched stretch. The villagers knew her, trusted her. They would nod in greeting as she passed, a silent acknowledgement of her diligent work, the essential service she provided. For many, Priya simply was the water, arriving reliably, bringing freshness and life to their homes. They saw her strength, her quiet dedication, the steady stream of her efforts. But beneath this outward grace, within the quiet chambers of Priya's own heart, a persistent feeling of depletion had taken root. It was a subtle, unacknowledged ache, a quiet sense that her life, like the water she carried, was constantly leaking away. With each gentle sway of the pot on her head, with each imperceptible ripple of water over the brim, with each tiny splash that escaped her careful grasp, Priya felt a corresponding loss within herself. It was not a dramatic gush, not a sudden emptying, but a continuous, subtle seeping, a silent draining of something essential, something meaningful and lasting. She would feel it most acutely in the quiet moments, as she poured the last drop from a pot into a waiting vessel in a villager's home, feeling the sudden lightness, the swift emptiness of the clay. Or as she walked back to the well, her pots now hollow and light, feeling a hollowness echoing within her own spirit. She would gaze at the damp patch on the earth where a few drops had fallen from her pot, or notice the faint dark streaks on the clay itself, evidence of water that had escaped, and feel a quiet sigh rise within her. It was as if, no matter how much she carried, no matter how carefully she moved, she could never truly hold on to it all. A part of it always escaped, always dissipated, always was lost to the earth or to the air, or simply to the relentless passage of time. This feeling was a constant, quiet companion on her journeys. She yearned to hold on to something, to accumulate, to keep her own inner vessel full. But her life, Her work seemed to be a continuous act of giving, of releasing, of watching precious resources subtly diminish. She saw the villagers use the water she brought, consuming it, transforming it, and then it was gone, absorbed, vanished, and she, Priya, was left to return to the well, to begin the cycle anew, feeling the subtle emptiness of her own efforts. She tried, in her quiet way, to stem these perceived losses. She sought out different pots, examining them with a meticulous eye, searching for the thickest clay, the most perfectly smooth, unblemished surface, believing that a superior vessel might hold its contents more securely. She would spend hours polishing the clay, running her fingers over every curve, every rim, trying to sense any hidden porosity, any subtle flaw that might allow even a whisper of water to escape. She would tap them gently, listening for the purest, most resonant sound, convinced that a pot that sang clearly would also hold perfectly. She tried walking with even greater care, if that were possible. Her steps, already light and graceful, became almost impossibly slow and deliberate, each footfall placed with an exquisite precision. She would fix her gaze on a point far ahead, her head held perfectly still, minimizing any unnecessary movement of her body, any subtle shift that might disturb the precious cargo. She held her breath sometimes, convinced that even the rise and fall of her chest might cause a tremor, a tiny spill. It was a constant inner vigilance, a silent battle against the laws of gravity and the very nature of water. She experimented with shorter routes, paths that were less winding, less steep, hoping to reduce the time the water spent in transit, believing that less time meant less opportunity for loss. She would study the terrain, mentally mapping out every possible shortcut, every way to shave off a few precious steps, a few precious moments. She tried to carry fewer pots, thinking that perhaps the sheer volume of her efforts was the source of the draining sensation. But then the needs of the villagers would go unmet, and the emptiness would feel even greater, a different kind of loss. Yet, despite all her meticulous efforts, all her careful adjustments, the sensation of being drained, of subtle loss, remained. The faint, damp streaks on the clay pots still appeared. The small, dark patches on the dusty path still marked the invisible trail of her efforts. The gurgle of water being poured out still ended with the swift lightness of an emptying vessel, and the quiet sigh in her own heart, that persistent feeling of subtle depletion, continued to echo within her. It was a quiet resignation that settled over her, a deep-seated belief that this was simply the nature of her work, and perhaps the nature of her life. To carry was to lose, to give was to empty, to serve was to diminish. She did not complain, for it was her duty, her craft, her contribution to the weaving of the village life. She simply continued, day after day, her graceful movements masking a quiet, unacknowledged leakage within her own spirit. Each journey to the well and back, each pot filled and emptied, became a silent testament to this pervasive sense of unacknowledged loss, a slow, gentle draining away of something precious that she could never quite grasp, never quite hold on to. She would often sit by the well after her last delivery, watching the ripples on the water's surface slowly fade to stillness, feeling the silence of the empty pots beside her. The sun would begin its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long, peaceful shadows. But even in this tranquil beauty, Priya would feel the familiar whisper of depletion, a quiet echo in her heart, a longing for something that would stay, that would fill, that would not leak away with each passing moment, with each drop of water she carried. She simply did her work, moving with her innate grace, her face often damp with exertion, or perhaps with a fine mist of water that had escaped, unnoticed, from the pots she carried so diligently, so carefully, and yet so seemingly in vain. Her journey, like the winding paths she walked, continued. Each day, the same diligent effort. Each day, the same quiet struggle. Each day, the same pervasive, unacknowledged leakage, an invisible current beneath the surface of her outwardly graceful, strong, and dedicated life. And in this repetition, in this silent rhythm of giving and perceived loss, lay the quiet ground for a new understanding, a seed waiting to be watered by the very leaks she so carefully tried to prevent. The world around her, ever patient, ever observant, held a secret, waiting for the moment when Priya's gaze would truly soften, when her heart would truly open, to see what her hands, in their diligent work, were truly creating along the way. And so, in this silent rhythm of giving and perceived loss, lay the quiet ground for a new understanding, a seed waiting to be watered by the very leaks she so carefully tried to prevent. The world around her, ever patient, ever observant, held a secret, waiting for the moment when Priya's gaze would truly soften, when her heart would truly open, to see what her hands, in their diligent work, were truly creating along the way. It was a warm afternoon, the kind where the sun felt like a gentle hand on the back, and the air shimmered with a soft, sleepy haze. Priya was on her way back to the village well, her empty pots now light and hollow, a familiar sensation that usually brought with it that subtle echo of depletion. The path beneath her bare feet was warm and dusty, winding its way through the low hills, past sun-drenched fields and clumps of ancient, gnarled olive trees. She moved with her usual quiet grace, her steps almost silent, her gaze usually fixed on the distant well, or sometimes on the dust kicked up by her own diligent feet. But today, something shifted. Perhaps it was the quality of the light, so mellow and inviting, or perhaps a particularly sweet scent carried on the breeze, a fragrance she hadn't noticed before. She paused, not with a conscious decision, but as if her body, without her mind's instruction, simply chose to halt. Her feet settled in the warm dust, and for a moment she stood still. The only sounds the distant hum of bees and the soft rustle of leaves in the languid air. Her gaze, which had been cast forward, now drifted downwards, following the curve of the dusty path. And there, along its very edge, where the path met the slightly rougher, untended ground, she saw it. Not a sudden, dramatic burst of color, but a delicate, vibrant line of life, stretching for many paces, a verdant ribbon against the dry earth. It was a small, unexpected garden, completely uncultivated, yet thriving with an astonishing vitality. Tiny, delicate wildflowers, in shades of soft lavender and sunny yellow, nodded gently in the faint breeze. Broad-leafed plants, their surfaces a deep, rich green, unfurled themselves towards the sun, their leaves plump and glossy. Even the grasses here were lusher, taller, a more vibrant emerald than the parched, straw-colored strands that stretched into the fields beyond. Small, creeping vines with tiny, almost imperceptible blossoms wove their way through the undergrowth, creating a tapestry of life. Priya knelt slowly, her empty pots clinking softly as they settled beside her. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against a dewy leaf, feeling its coolness, its unexpected resilience. She looked closely at the earth around the plants. It was not parched and cracked like the rest of the path, but subtly darker, richer, holding a quiet moisture that seemed to defy the dry season. A deep sense of wonder, followed by a quiet shock, began to bloom within her. This garden, this flourishing strip of green and color, was growing precisely, exactly, in the place where her daily journeys had brought her. It was situated along the very edge where her clay pots, no matter how carefully carried, had always left their faint, damp streaks. It was here that the imperceptible drips and spills, the tiny, unnoticed releases of water from her vessels, had always fallen. She had always perceived these as losses. Each drop that escaped, each faint damp patch on the clay, each subtle darkening of the dust beneath her feet. These had been quiet testaments to her perceived inadequacy, to the unacknowledged leakage that had settled in her heart. She had seen them as proof that her efforts were always diminishing, always draining away, unable to hold on to anything completely. But now, looking at this vibrant, unexpected garden, nourished by what she had always thought of as her own weakness, her own failure, a profound realization began to dawn. What she had thought was leaking was, in truth, irrigating. What she had believed to be a silent draining, a slow, gentle loss, had actually been a continuous act of nurturing, an invisible current of life-giving sustenance. Her gentle, unnoticed releases, the very losses she had so painstakingly tried to prevent, had created this beauty, this flourishing abundance along her way. The shift in her heart was immediate, yet soft, like the quiet unfurling of a new leaf. The familiar hollowness that usually accompanied her empty pots was replaced by a lightness, a sense of unexpected fullness. She looked at her hands, strong and capable, still bearing the faint imprint of the clay pots. These hands, in their daily work, had not merely been carrying water, they had been cultivating life. Her diligent steps, though aimed at preventing spills, had been sowing seeds of green and color. Her entire journey, which she had viewed as a cycle of depletion, was, in fact, a continuous act of creation. She stood up slowly, her gaze still lingering on the small garden. It was a secret, known only to the earth and now to her. No one else, passing swiftly along the path, would likely notice this subtle ribbon of life or understand its profound origin, and that, in itself, held a quiet beauty. The true impact of her efforts had been unfolding in the unseen, in the unacknowledged, in the very spaces where she had felt most diminished. As she continued her walk to the well, her empty pots now felt different in her hands. They were no longer merely vessels that emptied. They were instruments of life, each subtle drip a tiny offering, each spill a silent blessing upon the earth. The faint damp streaks on the clay, which once brought a sigh of resignation, now seemed like gentle badges of honor, proof of the life they had helped to create. The dusty path, once a canvas for her perceived losses, was now a testament to the hidden, continuous acts of nurturing that unfolded with each step. Priya's heart was lighter than it had been in years, perhaps lighter than it had ever been. She saw her daily efforts not as a relentless cycle of depletion, but as a continuous, quiet act of nurturing, a steady flow of life that, even in its gentle release, created beauty and growth. The water she carried in all its forms was not merely for quenching thirst in homes. It was for the earth itself, for the small, unnoticed corners of the world that needed a gentle touch of life. She reached the well, its ancient stones cool beneath her fingertips. As she lowered her pots into the dark, cool water, she felt no trace of the old hollowness. Instead, a quiet joy resonated within her, a deep sense of purpose that transcended the simple act of carrying. She was not merely moving water from one place to another. She was a part of its flow, a conduit for its life-giving essence, her very perceived losses becoming the source of quiet, unexpected beauty. And as she began her journey back to the village, her pots now full and heavy once more, her steps were still graceful, but now imbued with a new, profound understanding, a quiet wisdom that had bloomed from the very ground she walked upon. This story shows us how perceived loss can be a source of life. Priya discovered that what felt like leaking was actually creating a beautiful garden. Buddhism teaches that emptiness and release, or shunyata, can be spaces for new growth. When we accept the natural flow and release in our lives, we often find that we are cultivating unexpected beauty. Now, let us bring our awareness back to our own bodies. Feel the gentle weight of your limbs resting upon your bed. Allow your shoulders to soften, releasing any tension they might hold. Let your jaw relax, your tongue settle gently in your mouth. There is nothing left to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. You don't need to understand anything more. Simply allow your body to be heavy, supported, and completely at ease. Feel the quiet stillness within you, a deep well of peace. Everything is complete as it is. You are already home. Simply rest, let go, sleep well. The quiet hum of the forest, still settling from the day, gave way to the soft, rhythmic sounds of a different kind of craft. Not the deep thrum of earth mounds, nor the gentle slosh of water, but the delicate whisper of wood, shaped by knowing hands. Here, in a small, tidy workshop nestled at the edge of the village, lived Sunil, the flute maker. Sunil was a man in his 30s, his fingers long and agile, etched with the faint lines of countless splinters and the smooth polish of bamboo. His workshop was a place of quiet order, filled with the sweet, dry scent of seasoned bamboo, cedar dust, and the subtle aroma of natural oils used for finishing. Bundles of bamboo, ranging in thickness and length, leaned against the walls, their pale green and golden hues catching the soft light that filtered through the small, open window. Tools lay neatly arranged on his workbench. Small, sharp knives, fine chisels, delicate reamers, and rolls of sandpaper, each one worn smooth by years of use. For as long as he could remember, Sunil had been drawn to bamboo. He loved its strength, its flexibility, its inherent straightness, and the way it seemed to hold a secret song within its segmented hollows. He knew how to select the perfect stalk from the groves by the river, listening for the subtle resonance when tapped, examining the texture of its skin, searching for the precise spacing of its nodes. He knew how to cure it, how to split it, how to coax it into revealing the instrument it was destined to become. His craft was a patient one. Each flute began as a simple length of bamboo, carefully chosen. Sunil would measure with an almost intuitive precision, marking the places where the finger holes would be, where the mouthpiece would shape the breath. Then came the carving, slow and deliberate. With his sharpest knife, he would begin to remove the outer layers, shaping the bamboo into a smooth, cylindrical form. He would carve the embouchure, the small oval hole where the breath would first enter, shaping it with an artist's touch until it felt just right beneath his thumb. But the most crucial part of his work, the very essence of making a flute, was the hollowing. Bamboo, in its natural state, is segmented by internal nodes, small diaphragms that divide the stalk into chambers. To become a flute, these nodes had to be carefully, painstakingly removed. Sunil would use long, slender reamers, some tipped with sharpened metal, others with abrasive stone, to slowly, meticulously clear out the inside of the bamboo. He would work from both ends, listening to the subtle change in sound as the internal barriers gave way, until the entire length was a single, uninterrupted channel, a hollow space, an emptiness. It was this act of hollowing, this creation of emptiness, that had begun to trouble Sunil. He would sit in his workshop, the sweet, clear notes of a newly finished flute still echoing in the air, and a strange, quiet unease would settle over him. He made music, beautiful music that brought joy to others, music that floated on the wind and filled the village with sweetness. But to make this music, he had to empty the bamboo. And in doing so, he wondered if he had inadvertently emptied something within himself. He felt a hollow emptiness inside, much like the bamboo he emptied. It wasn't a sharp pain or a crushing sadness, but a pervasive sense of absence, a quiet echo in his heart. It was as if, in making space for song in the wood, he had drawn out a part of his own spirit, leaving a similar void within. He brought music into the world, yes, but at what cost to his own inner landscape? He would often trace the smooth, cool interior of a finished flute with his finger, feeling the perfect, uninterrupted emptiness. It was necessary, he knew. Without this void, there could be no music. Yet, the feeling persisted. He would look at the discarded bamboo shavings, the small, fibrous bits of nodes that lay on his workbench, remnants of the material he had removed, and wonder if they were symbolic of pieces of himself, chipped away, leaving him lighter, but also, perhaps, less whole. In his quiet struggle, Sunil began to experiment. He tried to resist the essential nature of his craft, to find a way to make music without such a profound act of emptying. He would select thicker bamboo stalks, hoping that a more substantial material would somehow prevent the feeling of internal hollowness. He tried leaving some bamboo solid, at least partially, thinking that perhaps a core of uncarved wood would anchor his own spirit, prevent it from floating away into the void he created. But a solid piece of bamboo, no matter how beautiful, could not sing. It was merely wood, silent and unyielding. The music needed the space. He tried carving intricate patterns onto the outside of the flutes, believing that if the surface was rich and ornate, perhaps the internal emptiness would be less noticeable, less impactful. He spent hours etching delicate spirals and geometric designs into the bamboo, his tools dancing over the surface. The flutes were indeed beautiful to behold, their exteriors a testament to his artistry. But when he held them, the hollow echo within his own heart remained, untouched by the external adornment. The patterns were a distraction, a lovely veil, but they did not fill the void he felt. Sometimes, in his meticulous hollowing process, he would deliberately try to leave some of the internal nodes intact, just a sliver, a faint whisper of a barrier, thinking that perhaps a partially cleared channel would still allow for music, yet retain some of the bamboo's original structure. He hoped that if the bamboo wasn't entirely empty, neither would he be. But the sound produced was always muffled, choked, or simply absent. The breath, to become song, needed an unobstructed path. The nodes, those natural internal divisions, had to be removed completely. The music demanded a pure, clear emptiness. Each attempt led him back to the same conclusion. The flute must be hollow. The music demanded emptiness. And with each flute he completed, the beautiful resonant notes would fill his workshop, only to be followed by that familiar, quiet echo within his own spirit. He saw the joy on the faces of those who played his flutes, heard the sweet melodies that drifted from homes and festivals, and he felt a quiet pride in his skill. But the question remained, a persistent whisper in the background of his mind. Did he, in making space for music, truly empty his own spirit? He would sit by the window in the late afternoons, the setting sun casting long shadows across his tools and the piles of finished flutes. He would pick up a new piece of bamboo, feeling its smooth skin, its cool weight. He would tap it gently, listening for the faint, resonant sound it made, the promise of music held within. And then, his fingers would begin their work, selecting a knife, a reamer, and slowly, patiently, he would begin the process of hollowing, of creating the necessary emptiness, all the while wondering if he was hollowing himself out too. The feeling of internal hollowness persisted, a quiet echo in his quiet workshop. It was not a despair that crippled him, but a subtle, pervasive sense of incompleteness, a lingering question that his skilled hands, for all their artistry, could not answer. He continued his craft day after day, week after week, making flutes that sang with sweet, clear notes, bringing joy to many. But in the heart of the flute maker, the hollow space remained, waiting for a different kind of song to fill it, a different kind of understanding to make it whole. One sunny morning, the light spilled generously into Sunil's workshop, illuminating the fine dust motes that danced in the air, the gleam on his well-worn tools, and the rows of finished flutes resting like sleeping birds on their racks. The air was soft, carrying the distant murmur of the village waking, the gentle rustle of leaves outside his open window. Sunil was meticulously sanding a new piece of bamboo, his movements slow and practiced. When a small shadow fell across his workbench, he looked up to see a child standing in the doorway, a girl, no older than 5 or 6 summers. Her eyes, wide and luminous, were filled with a boundless curiosity, taking in every detail of the workshop, the bamboo stalks, the sharp knives, the coiled shavings, and most of all, the beautiful, finished flutes. She wore a simple, faded tunic, and her hair was tied back with a piece of string. She stood perfectly still for a moment, absorbing the quiet atmosphere, her presence a soft, new note in the familiar rhythm of Sunil's day. Sunil smiled, a gentle warmth spreading through his face. Children often wandered into his workshop, drawn by the music or the intriguing shapes of the bamboo. He offered a small nod of welcome, and the child, emboldened, took a tentative step inside. Her gaze, however, did not land on the intricate patterns he sometimes carved, nor on the glistening smoothness of the bamboo's skin. Instead, her finger, small and delicate, pointed directly to the open end of a finished flute that lay on the bench beside him. "Why must it be empty?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper, yet clear and full of a genuine wonder. Her question, so simple, so direct, cut through the layers of Sunil's long-held contemplation, striking a chord deep within him that resonated with an unexpected clarity. It was the very question he had been asking himself, in different words, for so long. Sunil paused, his hand still on the bamboo he had been sanding. He looked at the child, at her innocent, unburdened gaze, and then at the flute. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, its cool, smooth surface. He turned it gently in his hands, allowing the morning light to catch the perfectly hollow interior. He had explained this countless times to adults, to apprentices, to customers, but this time, it felt different. He needed to choose his words carefully, not just for the child, but for himself. "It is not empty, little one," Sunil began, his voice soft like the rustle of the bamboo leaves in the wind. He brought the flute closer to the child, allowing her to peer inside. "See, it seems empty, yes, but It is actually a pathway. The child tilted her head, her eyes still wide with inquiry. A pathway for what? She asked. Sunil took a slow, deep breath, feeling the air fill his own lungs, then release gently. A pathway for breath, he explained. Your breath, my breath, the breath of anyone who holds it. He demonstrated, holding the flute lightly to his lips, but not yet playing. When you breathe into this space, he continued, gesturing to the embouchure, your breath travels through this long, clear channel. He ran his finger along the length of the flute, indicating the hollow core. And as it travels, it gathers shape. It learns to dance. He paused, letting the image settle. The emptiness, you see, is not an absence of something, he said, his voice becoming a little deeper, as if he were explaining a profound secret. It is a necessary space. It is the room through which breath can move, gathering shape and becoming song. He held the flute up, allowing the sunlight to shine through its length. Without this space, this clear path, the breath would just be breath. It would have no way to become music. As he spoke, choosing each word with care, not just for the child, but as if articulating a truth to his own heart, a profound realization began to unfurl within Sunil. He had always known the practical necessity of the hollow, but he had seen it as a void, a lack, an emptying. Now, in the innocent presence of the child, and in the simple act of explaining, he began to see it differently. The hollow space was not an absence, but a capacity. It was not a void to be feared or filled, but a spaciousness, an essential condition that allowed spirit, breath, and life to flow and find expression. The very thing he had perceived as a source of his own internal depletion was, in truth, the source of all the music he created. The emptiness was not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be embraced. It was the fundamental canvas upon which the vibrant colors of sound could be painted. He looked at the flute in his hands, no longer seeing a symbol of personal void, but a vessel of possibility. The bamboo, once filled with its own fibrous life, was now empty, yes, but it was not lifeless. It was alive with the potential for song, waiting for breath to give it purpose, to give it voice. It was waiting for the spirit of the player to move through it. The emptiness was not the end of something, but the beginning of everything. A quiet warmth spread through Sunil's chest, pushing back the familiar echo of hollowness. It was a feeling of lightness, of clarity, as if a long-held shadow had finally lifted. He felt a profound sense of understanding, not just of his craft, but of his own inner landscape. His spirit was not being emptied, but was, perhaps, being prepared, made spacious, made ready for a different kind of flow, a different kind of song. He raised the flute to his lips once more, this time with a new intention. He breathed not just air, but his newfound understanding, his quiet revelation, into the instrument. The notes that emerged were sweet and clear, as always, but they carried a deeper resonance. They were imbued with a new understanding, a lightness, a sense of profound peace. The music filled the workshop, dancing among the dust motes, embracing the child in its gentle melody. And for Sunil, it filled the spaciousness within his own heart, not with something new, but with the recognition of what had always been there, waiting to be understood. The child listened, her eyes closed for a moment, swaying gently with the melody. When Sunil finished, she opened her eyes and simply smiled, a knowing, peaceful smile that reflected the soft music she had just heard. She had asked a simple question, and in Sunil's answer, both she and the flute maker had found a deeper truth. This story shows us how emptiness creates capacity. Sunil discovered that the hollow space in a flute is what makes it useful, allowing breath to become song. Buddhism teaches that emptiness, or shunyata, is not an absence but a potential, a spaciousness for life to unfold. When we embrace the empty spaces in our lives, we create room for new possibilities and deep wisdom. Now, let us bring our awareness back to our own bodies. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest with each breath. Let the sounds of the world around you gently fade, allowing your attention to rest within. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply be here in this moment with your breath. Notice the sensation of the air as it enters your nostrils, cool and fresh. Feel it gently expand your chest, your belly, bringing life and energy. And then, notice the sensation as you slowly release the breath, feeling a soft letting go, a gentle release of any tension, any thoughts, any expectations, just the simple rhythmic flow of breath. Inhale, feeling spaciousness. Exhale, feeling release. Allow your breath to deepen, to become softer, more natural. Imagine that with each inhale, you are creating a quiet, open space within you, like the hollow of a flute, ready to receive. And with each exhale, you are allowing any lingering thoughts or worries to gently drift away, creating more room, more ease. Rest in this feeling of spaciousness, this gentle rhythm. You are whole, you are complete, just as you are. There is a deep well of peace within you, always available, always present. Simply rest in this knowing. Let go. Sleep well. Now, let us turn our awareness to another quiet corner of this timeless world, to a place where the earth itself becomes the canvas, and the hands of a craftsman shape eternity from stone. Allow your breath to remain soft, your body at ease, as we gently drift towards the sound of a hammer meeting a chisel, a rhythmic whisper against the vastness of time. In a valley cradled by ancient, worn hills, where the morning mist clung to the rugged outcrops before surrendering to the rising sun, lived a man named Bhima. His strength was not merely in his broad shoulders or his powerful arms, but in the quiet, unyielding patience that defined his days. Bhima was a grinding stone maker, a master of a craft as old as the mountains themselves. His workshop was not a building with walls, but an open space beneath a towering, gnarled oak, its roots gripping the very earth from which Bhima drew his raw material. Around him lay the scattered fragments of rock, the fine dust that coated everything in a pale, almost silvery sheen, and the heavy, undeniable presence of stones in various stages of creation. Every day, from the first pale light of dawn until the long shadows stretched across the valley floor, Bhima could be found seated amidst his stones. His tools were simple, forged from iron by the village smith, a range of chisels, sharp and precise, and hammers of different weights, each with its own particular ring when it met steel. His work began with the careful selection of a boulder, a solid, unyielding mass of granite or basalt, chosen for its density and its hidden potential. He would tap it with a small hammer, listening intently to the subtle resonances, discerning the internal structure, learning its secrets before he even made the first mark. Once chosen, the slow, arduous process began. Bhima would work the raw rock, first breaking away the larger, unwanted sections with heavy blows, then refining the shape with smaller, more controlled strikes. His hands, thick and calloused, moved with a practiced grace that belied the sheer force they wielded. He would hold the chisel steady, angling it just so, then bring the hammer down with a precise, deliberate motion. Clink, tap, thud. A small shard of stone would fly, sometimes catching the light like a tiny fleeting spark, then settling back into the accumulating dust. Hours would pass, marked only by the shifting light and the steady rhythm of his labor. He shaped the stone, slowly coaxing it from its rough, untamed form into a perfect, balanced circle. The inner surface, the grinding surface, demanded the most meticulous attention. It had to be just rough enough to mill grain, yet strong enough not to crumble, its texture a silent promise of sustenance for generations to come. He understood the delicate balance between abrasive power and enduring strength, a balance he sought to imprint into every stone he made. Bhima ran his calloused hand over the smooth, cool surface of a newly finished grinding stone. It was a perfect circle, heavy and strong, ready to serve families for generations. He had chiseled it from the solid rock, slowly, patiently, feeling the resistance of the stone under his hammer. He knew these stones would outlast him, outlast his children, perhaps even their children. They would stand, silent sentinels of the hearth, long after his own hands had stilled, long after his own voice had faded into the quiet hum of the valley. And this knowledge, instead of bringing comfort, brought a strange kind of unease. A subtle discord began to hum beneath the rhythmic clink of his chisel, a persistent whisper that grew louder with each passing season. He felt his own life, so fleeting and temporary, grinding away against the backdrop of this eternal stone. Each stroke of his chisel felt like a piece of his own time, chipped away, never to return. He dedicated his days to creating something that would stand, steadfast and unchanging, while his own existence felt like the dust that blew away on the wind. He would pause in his work, the hammer resting heavy in his hand, and look at the vastness of the rock face from which he drew his material. It seemed to stretch back through time, unchanging, indifferent. He was but a brief moment in its long, slow story. This feeling, this quiet sense of his own impermanence, began to press down on him, heavier than any stone he had ever lifted. He saw the strength of the mountains, the enduring flow of the river, the ancient wisdom of the oak tree under which he sat, and he felt himself to be a transient visitor, a momentary ripple on an eternal sea. This feeling, this quiet sense of being ground away, began to manifest in his work. He started to work faster, his blows a little harder, a little more urgent. He wanted to leave more lasting marks, more undeniable evidence of his brief passage. He would try to carve his initials, small and hidden, into the underside of a stone, a silent whisper of his brief existence, a fragile attempt at permanence. A tiny B and H etched into the unpolished base, where they would likely never be seen, never be acknowledged. Yet they were there, a secret plea against the relentless tide of time. He would carve them with a smaller, finer chisel, his brow furrowed in concentration, the act itself a quiet defiance. He spent extra moments, even when his hands ached and his shoulders burned, trying to make the lines deeper, clearer, as if the very depth of the carving could somehow imbue it with more longevity, more meaning. It was a private ritual, a desperate whisper for his own permanence against the overwhelming silence of the stone. The ache in his hands was not just the familiar soreness of honest labor. It was a deeper ache, a weariness that settled into his bones, born of this internal struggle. His spirit felt restless, constantly pushing against the knowledge of his own impermanence. He saw the finished stones, lined up in neat rows, waiting to be collected by the villagers, and he knew they would be passed down, generation to generation, holding their shape, performing their task. And he, Bhima, the one who had given them form, would himself become only a memory. Then perhaps, not even that. He observed the subtle changes in the valley around him. The seasons turned, leaves burst forth, then withered and fell. The river swelled with winter rains, then dwindled to a gentle trickle in the summer sun. Everything changed, everything flowed, everything was in a state of becoming, then unbecoming. Yet his stones, once wrought, remained. They were a testament to something beyond the shifting sands of time, and he yearned to connect with that, to find that same enduring quality within himself. He would sometimes sit, long after the last clink of his chisel had faded into the evening quiet, his gaze fixed on the finished stones, their dark, solid forms immutable beneath the pale moonlight. Each one represented countless hours of his life, chipped away, shaped, given over to create something that would outlast him. And in that quiet, solitary contemplation, the weight of his own transient existence pressed upon him, a silent, heavy burden that no amount of chiseling could ever lighten. His hands, etched with the lines of effort and the fine dust of rock, seemed to him to be a map of a life that was constantly, slowly, being eroded. Each crease, each scar, was a mark of the passing years, a testament to the work he had done, but also a reminder of the time that had slipped through his grasp. He found himself looking at the stones not just as objects of his craft, but as symbols of a silent, unyielding eternity that mocked his own brief flicker of life. The grinding stone, a tool of transformation, of breaking down, of preparing things for sustenance, became in Bhima's mind a metaphor for his own life. Was he too being slowly ground away by the relentless turning of time, his essence refined, broken down until nothing remained? This quiet question, unasked but deeply felt, echoed in the spaciousness of his open-air workshop, lingering amidst the scent of rock dust and the cool evening air. He yearned for a deeper understanding, a way to reconcile his fleeting existence with the enduring legacy of his craft. He yearned for a quiet peace that seemed as solid and as unattainable as the very stone he shaped. The quiet question, unasked but deeply felt, echoed in the spaciousness of his open-air workshop, lingering amidst the scent of rock dust and the cool evening air. He yearned for a deeper understanding, a way to reconcile his fleeting existence with the enduring legacy of his craft. He yearned for a quiet peace that seemed as solid and as unattainable as the very stone he shaped. One quiet afternoon, this persistent yearning, this subtle disquiet, stirred within Bhima more strongly than usual. The familiar rhythm of his hammer against stone offered no solace, only a louder echo of his internal struggle. He laid down his tools, wiping the fine dust from his hands, and decided to walk. He did not know where he was going, only that he needed to move, to seek a different perspective from the unchanging rock face that had become both his livelihood and his quiet torment. He walked along a seldom trodden path, one that wound deeper into the gentle hills, away from the bustling heart of his own village. The air was soft, carrying the distant scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the leaves of ancient trees, dappling the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The path led him towards a smaller, almost forgotten hamlet, a place where time seemed to slow even further, where houses leaned a little more into the earth, and silence was a constant companion. The hamlet itself was quiet, its few dwellings weathered by countless seasons, their thatched roofs softened with moss. Children played silently in dusty courtyards, their movements slow and deliberate. As Bhima wandered deeper into its forgotten corners, past an old, unused well and a crumbling stone wall, he noticed a faint, almost invisible track leading towards a grove of gnarled olive trees. Curiosity, a gentle pull he rarely resisted, guided his steps. Beneath the shade of the oldest olive tree, half hidden by a tangle of wild vines and long grass, lay an ancient grinding stone. It was large, even larger than the ones he typically made, and clearly very old. It had been discarded, perhaps many generations ago, its purpose forgotten by the passage of time and the changing needs of the villagers. Dust and fine soil had settled into its crevices, and small, tenacious weeds grew from its surface, anchoring it firmly to the earth. Bhima knelt beside it, his rough, calloused hand reaching out to touch its surface. He ran his fingers over the stone, feeling the cool, smooth texture beneath his touch. This was not the familiar, rough surface he meticulously carved into his new stones, designed to grip and crush grain. No, this stone was utterly, completely smooth. Its once sharp ridges, meant to bite into grain, were now worn into a gentle slope, like a river stone polished by an endless current. The central hole, where the pivot would have once held the upper stone, was also smooth and widened, a silent testament to countless rotations. He traced the circular form, feeling the profound wear that had transformed its very nature. The grinding surface, the heart of its purpose, was gone. It had been ground away, not by his chisel, but by centuries of faithful service. It had fulfilled its function, day after day, year after year, slowly, imperceptibly, surrendering its own substance to the task of nourishing life. Now, it was utterly useless for its intended task. It could no longer grind grain. Its purpose had been surrendered to the passage of time, to the countless hands that had turned it, to the endless cycles of sustenance it had enabled. In that quiet moment, a profound realization dawned on Bhima. He looked at the discarded stone, not with pity, but with a sudden, startling clarity. He had spent so long yearning for permanence, for his own mark to endure, for his work to stand against the relentless tide of time. He had seen the stone's unchanging nature as its strength, its longevity as its greatest virtue. But this ancient stone, worn smooth and forgotten, showed him a different truth. Even the most enduring stone eventually surrenders to time. Its permanence was not in its static existence, its ability to last forever without change. Its true permanence, its true meaning, had been found in its period of service. The stone had not lasted forever in its original form. It had given itself, piece by tiny piece, to its purpose. Its purpose was not to simply be, but to do, to serve, to transform. Its value was in its function, in its active contribution, in the countless meals it had helped to prepare, the lives it had quietly sustained. The stone's life, its long, quiet journey, was now complete. It had fulfilled its destiny by being worn away, by becoming smooth and useless for its initial task. And in that very surrender, it had found its greatest meaning. It had not been defeated by time. It had simply completed its cycle of giving. Its essence was not in its physical form, but in the countless transformations it had facilitated. Bhima touched the worn stone again, a new sensation rising within him. The heavy burden that had pressed upon him for so long, the quiet sense of his own impermanence began to lift, slowly, gently, like mist dissolving in the morning sun. He understood now that his own life, too, found its meaning not in striving for an eternal mark, not in resisting the flow of time, but in embracing the act of service, in giving himself fully to the purpose of his hands, in the quiet, diligent creation of tools that nourished and sustained. True permanence, he realized, was not about lasting forever, but about serving completely, fully, and meaningfully while one can. It was about the quality of the giving, the intention behind the work, the quiet impact of one's efforts, rather than the duration of one's physical presence. His own brief existence, far from being a tragedy, was an opportunity to contribute, to shape, to provide, to pour his life's energy into something that would serve others, knowing that the act of service itself was the most enduring legacy. He looked around the quiet grove, at the ancient olive tree, its trunk gnarled and split by centuries, yet still bearing fruit. He saw the slow, patient work of nature, constantly transforming, constantly giving, constantly renewing. And he saw his own craft, not as a futile struggle against time, but as a part of this greater, beautiful cycle. His hands, though temporary, created tools of sustenance. His life, though fleeting, contributed to the ongoing rhythm of existence. A quiet peace settled over Bhima, a deep, steady calm that reached into the weary places of his spirit. The ache in his hands, though still present, was now the honest ache of purpose, not the restless pain of internal struggle. He rose from beside the worn stone, his steps lighter, his gaze softer. He turned and walked back towards his village, towards his workshop, the quiet clink of his chisel, no longer a reminder of what was being lost, but a celebration of what was being given. He would continue to carve his grinding stones, knowing now that each stroke, each patient hour, was an act of profound service, a quiet contribution to the unending flow of life. His mark would not be in an etched initial, but in the sustenance his stones provided, in the quiet turning of grain into flour, generation after generation. This story shows us that true value lies in purpose and service, not eternal duration. Bhima discovered that even eternal stone eventually surrenders to time, and its meaning comes from its use. Buddhism teaches about impermanence, or anicca, reminding us that everything changes and passes. When we focus on serving fully in the present moment, we find deep meaning and release the need for everlasting existence. Now, let us bring our awareness back to our own bodies. Feel the gentle weight of your limbs resting upon your bed. Allow your shoulders to soften, releasing any tension they might hold. Let your jaw relax, your tongue settle gently in your mouth. There's nothing left to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. You don't need to understand anything more. Simply allow your body to be heavy, supported, and completely at ease. Feel the quiet stillness within you, a deep well of peace. Everything is complete as it is. You are already home. Simply rest, let go. In a small, sun-dappled clearing, nestled at the edge of the whispering woods, lived Sundari. Her home was simple, built of clay and wood, its roof thatched with dried grasses, blending seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. The air around her dwelling often carried the sweet, earthy scent of honey, a testament to her quiet, diligent work. Sundari, a woman in the prime of her life, her hands capable and her movements graceful, was the wife of a wild honey collector. Her husband, whose name was Kavi, spent his days deep among the ancient trees, climbing to dizzying heights, his hands skilled at coaxing golden treasures from the hidden nests of wild bees. He brought home the raw, untamed sweetness of the forest, dripping from rough combs, fragrant with pollen and the scent of wild blossoms. He carried the spirit of the wild with him, a quiet strength born of navigating the untamed paths and understanding the rhythms of nature. And it was Sundari's task, once the honey was brought from the depths of the forest, to prepare it, to make it ready for the village, for trade, for keeping through the colder months. Her days were spent in a rhythm of warmth and scent, a quiet ceremony of transformation. The sounds of her work were soft, the gentle crackle of a small fire, the occasional clink of clay pots, the slow, steady drip of melting wax. She would carefully light a small, steady fire in her hearth beneath a large, rounded clay pot. Its sides were blackened and smoothed by the smoke and heat of many seasons, a silent witness to countless batches of honey transformed. Into this pot, she would gently place the rough chunks of honeycomb, still sticky with the wildness of the forest. The wax, a pale, intricate architecture, held within its cells the liquid gold, often mixed with tiny specks of pollen, fragments of propolis, or even a stray, delicate wing from a bee. Caught in the sweet embrace, the heat, gentle and insistent, would slowly begin its work, coaxing the wax to melt, releasing the honey from its intricate chambers. As the honey warmed, its scent would deepen, transforming from the fresh, raw fragrance of the forest to a richer, heavier perfume. It filled her small home with a sweet, almost intoxicating aroma, a fragrance that spoke of sunshine and flowers, of summer days and the tireless, ceaseless work of countless bees. It was a scent that evoked memories of childhood, of festivals, of simple joys and deep nourishment. But this warming was only the beginning of her process. The raw honey, as it came from the comb, was a living thing, rich with the essence of the forest itself. It held within it the faint, earthy taste of the tree bark where the comb had been built, the subtle tang of the wild, untamed air, the surprising texture of pollen grains. And Sundari, with her diligent hands and her quiet, thoughtful heart, believed it was her duty to make it pure, to make it safe, to make it last. She would take a fine woven cloth, perhaps a length of ancient, bleached linen, stretching it taut over the mouth of a second clean pot. Then, slowly, patiently, with a steady hand, she would pour the warm, liquid honey through the cloth. The fine mesh of the fabric was designed to catch all that she considered impurities. The dark flecks of propolis, the tiny bits of comb that had not fully melted, the visible traces of the wild world it had come from. Drop by golden drop, the honey would seep through, a slow, deliberate cascade. On the other side, it emerged clear and smooth, a pristine stream of amber light, catching the afternoon sun as it fell. It was beautiful, undeniably so. It shimmered in the clay pot below, a liquid jewel, perfectly translucent, ready for storage in carefully prepared clay jars, ready to be enjoyed throughout the year without the gritty texture of wax or the surprising, sometimes startling crunch of a stray seed. This refined honey was easy to pour, easy to mix, consistent in its sweetness. It was, she believed, perfect. Yet, with each straining, with each deliberate removal of what she deemed debris, a quiet unease began to grow within Sundari. A subtle discord, like a barely audible drone, started to hum beneath the surface of her peaceful, rhythmic routine. She looked at the discarded wax, still holding the faint memory of honey, its honeycomb structure now collapsed and softened. She looked at the fine mesh of the cloth, dotted with the tiny, dark remnants of the forest, the visible evidence of what she had separated. And she felt, deeply and wordlessly, that she was removing something essential, something vital. She was making it pure, yes. She was making it safe, yes. She was making it last, certainly. But in doing so, she felt she was taming it. She was stripping away its wildness, its raw, untamed essence. It was as if she was taking the very spirit of the forest, the lifeblood of the bees, and refining it into something too controlled, too predictable, too human-made. The honey, once alive with the chaotic beauty of nature, became orderly. It became still. Its vibrancy, she feared, was being muted. Sundari wondered if, in her meticulous pursuit of perfection, she was inadvertently losing the very thing that made the wild honey truly special. The rich, earthy notes that spoke of ancient trees, the subtle bitterness that hinted at unknown, distant blossoms, the faint crunch that reminded one of the arduous, winding journey from flower to comb. These complex nuances were smoothed away, replaced by a singular, uniform sweetness. It was a beautiful sweetness, to be sure, but it lacked the deep, layered story that the raw honey told. Sometimes she would watch her husband, Kavi, return from the forest, his face tanned by the sun, his hands sticky with raw honey, still warm from the hive. He carried with him the scent of pine and damp earth, of exertion and wild freedom. And the honey he carried, still in its rough comb, seemed to pulse with a different kind of energy than the clear, golden liquid she produced. It felt more alive, more authentic. It held the echoes of the forest in its very form. She began to experiment quietly, almost secretly, driven by this persistent, nagging feeling. She would set aside a small portion of the raw honey, leaving it just as it came from the comb, wax and all. She would store it in a small, unsealed pot, letting it breathe, letting it retain its untamed edges, its natural texture. She would keep pieces of the comb, dark and intricate, marveling at the perfect geometry, the sheer artistry of the bees, and the delicate way the honey nestled within. She hoped that by preserving some of its original, wild form, she could hold on to that elusive wildness, that untamed spirit that seemed to vanish in her pots. But even these attempts felt like a compromise, a small rebellion against her own diligent nature. The raw honey, with its fragments of comb, felt messy in comparison to her refined batches. It felt less finished, less clean. It was harder to serve, harder to store without attracting tiny ants or other creatures from the forest, and the feeling of taming, of losing something essential, lingered within her. It settled in her heart like a fine dust, a quiet shadow across her otherwise peaceful days, a gentle ache that resisted easy explanation. She would stir the simmering pot, watching the impurities rise to the surface, forming a delicate foam ready to be skimmed away. Each scoop of foam, each discarded fragment, felt like a small excision, a necessary sacrifice in the name of purity and preservation. But the question remained, a persistent whisper in her mind, accompanying the soft plink-plink of honey dripping through the cloth. What was the true cost of this perfection? What was lost when the wildness was removed? What did honey truly become when it was no longer truly wild, no longer truly a part of the forest, but merely a sweet, clear syrup, refined and ready for keeping, cleansed of its very origins? And so, the quiet question remained, a persistent whisper in her mind, accompanying the soft plink-plink of honey dripping through the cloth. What was the true cost of this perfection? What was lost when the wildness was removed? What did honey truly become when it was no longer truly wild, no longer truly a part of the forest, but merely a sweet, clear syrup, refined and ready for keeping, cleansed of its very origins? Sundari often found herself lost in this quiet contemplation, her hands moving with practiced ease, her mind tracing the unseen currents of nature and human intent. She would sit by the low, flickering flame, the clay pot a gentle warmth against her skilled fingers, the air thick and sweet around her. The honey in the pot would simmer, a slow, golden breath, its surface occasionally stirring with a tiny bubble, like a sigh from the depths of its sweetness. It was a rhythm she knew intimately, a dance of heat and time, of transformation and refinement. On this particular afternoon, the sunlight, soft and diffused, filtered through the small, open window of her workspace, painting the dust motes dancing in the air with a faint, ethereal glow. The forest outside hummed with its own gentle symphony, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves in a lazy breeze, the faint, almost imperceptible drone of the wild bees, always present, always at work. Sundari was focused, her gaze fixed on the shimmering surface of the honey, watching for the subtle signs that it was ready for the next stage of straining. She held a long, slender wooden spoon, occasionally stirring the thick, warm liquid, ensuring its even transformation. The aroma of the honey was particularly potent that day, a deep, inviting perfume that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the air. It was a scent of countless blossoms, of sun-drenched fields and hidden forest glades, of nectar gathered diligently, drop by precious drop, and transformed within the intricate chambers of the hive. It was a scent that promised sustenance, sweetness, and the quiet, enduring magic of nature's bounty. Perhaps it was this overwhelming sweetness, this irresistible invitation, that drew the small creature towards her open window. Sundari did not notice it at first, so absorbed was she in her careful tending. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible buzzing, lighter than the usual hum of the forest, caught her attention. It was a small, solitary sound, a fragile tremor in the otherwise still air of her workshop. She looked up, her gaze following the sound. And there it was, a small, weary bee, its wings a blur of exhausted effort, its legs heavy with the golden dust of pollen. It was not one of the large, robust forest bees that Kavi often spoke of, but a smaller, perhaps younger one, its movements slow and deliberate, as if its journey had already taken too much from its tiny reserves. It seemed to hover for a moment, suspended in the golden sunlight, its antennae twitching, drawn by the intoxicating, unwavering scent of the honey. It drifted closer, then closer still, its tiny body trembling with the effort. Sundari watched, her spoon paused mid-stir. A quiet fascination held her. She had seen bees in her workshop before, drawn by the stray drop, the forgotten crumb. She would usually guide them gently back outside, or simply observe them as they found their way. But this bee seemed different. It was so slow, so deliberate, its tiny life force visibly diminished. It seemed to be searching, desperately, for something. The bee circled once, a slow, wavering dance in the warm air, its compound eyes fixed on the shimmering gold in the pot. Then, as if all its strength suddenly gave way, it descended. It did not land on the rim of the pot or on the wooden spoon Sundari held. Instead, with a final, almost imperceptible tremor of its wings, the small, weary bee landed directly in the boiling liquid. There was no struggle, no frantic buzzing, no splash. The bee was simply absorbed. One moment, it was there, a tiny, living spark, a creature of the wild, drawn by the very essence of its existence. The next, it was gone, instantly disappearing beneath the golden surface, swallowed by the sweet, simmering warmth. Its fragile form was instantly overwhelmed, its brief life extinguished in the very substance it had helped to create. The surface of the honey, disturbed for only a fraction of a second, smoothed over again, becoming perfectly still, perfectly clear, as if nothing had ever happened. A quiet shock ran through Sundari. It was not a loud, dramatic shock, but a deep, visceral tremor, a coldness that settled somewhere behind her heart. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand, still holding the wooden spoon, froze, suspended over the now undisturbed surface of the honey. She stared at the spot where the bee had vanished, though there was nothing now to see, only the endless golden expanse. In that stark moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The gentle hum of the forest outside faded from her awareness. The warmth of the simmering honey, once comforting, now felt strangely chilling. The sweet aroma, once intoxicating, now carried a subtle, almost imperceptible tang of something else, something she had not recognized before. The bee's silent disappearance was not just a small incident, a fleeting accident. It was a profound, undeniable revelation. It was the answer to the quiet question that had been humming beneath her days, the unspoken discord that had settled in her heart. She understood. With a clarity that pierced through her long-held assumptions, she saw it. The very act of making things pure enough for keeping, of refining them to last, often meant removing the very life that created them. The wildness, the untamed spirit, the living essence. It was lost, not just in the pursuit of perfection, but in the very achievement of it. The honey she sought to create, the clear, smooth, pristine liquid that shimmered so beautifully in her clean pots, was indeed perfect for keeping. It would not ferment. It would not crystallize unevenly. It would remain pure and sweet for months, even years. But its purity, she now saw, came at a cost. It was a purity that had been achieved by the removal of all that was wild, all that was unpredictable, all that was, in its own way, alive. The tiny bee, drawn by the scent of its own creation, had returned to the source, only to be consumed by the very process meant to preserve its bounty. Sundari paused, her gaze now sweeping over the smooth, clear honey, seeing now both its undeniable beauty and its quiet, profound cost. The golden surface, once a symbol of her careful diligence, now reflected back a different truth. It was beautiful, yes, but it was a beauty that had shed its origins, a sweetness that had forgotten the chaotic, vibrant dance of creation, the subtle bitterness of distant blossoms, the faint crunch of a stray seed, the earthy taste of tree bark. These were not impurities, she realized, not truly. They were the stories. They were the echoes of the wild, the living memory of the forest. And in her pursuit of smooth perfection, she had diligently, meticulously removed them all. The honey was no longer a raw, pulsing fragment of the forest. It was a refined essence, a human-crafted ideal. It was perfect for the table, perfect for storage, perfect for a long, predictable life. But it was no longer wild. It was no longer alive with the chaotic, untamed spirit of its origins. It had become, in its own quiet way, a monument to what had been. A deep sigh, almost imperceptible, escaped Sundari's lips. It was not a sigh of resignation, but of profound understanding. The ache in her heart, the persistent, nagging feeling of losing something essential, had found its voice in the silent disappearance of the small bee. She had always sought to preserve, to make things last, to bring order to the unpredictable bounty of the wild. But in her striving, she had inadvertently diminished the very life force she sought to honor. She gently placed the wooden spoon down, its soft clatter barely disturbing the quiet. She knew then that her craft was not just about making honey pure. It was about understanding the delicate balance between preservation and life, between refinement and wildness. It was about recognizing that the truest beauty, the deepest richness, often resided not in the absence of perceived flaws, but in the presence of all that made a thing whole, complex and vibrantly alive, even if that meant a little less order, a little more wildness, a little more of the untamed spirit of the forest. The simmering honey continued its quiet transformation, its golden surface now holding not just the promise of sweetness, but the quiet, poignant truth of its journey, a story whispered by a small, lost bee, absorbed into its very heart. Sundari looked at it, and a new kind of peace settled within her, a peace born not of certainty, but of a deeper, more compassionate understanding. Her hands, still warm from the pot, felt a new weight, a new responsibility, a quiet reverence for the delicate balance between the wild and the tame, between the raw and the refined, between life and its quiet cost. The quiet understanding that settled within Sundari, a peace born of knowing the subtle costs of purity, gently receded, making way for another story, another life unfolding in the quiet villages of this timeless land. As the scent of honey, both sweet and poignant, drifted on the unseen currents of memory, we turn our gaze now to a different kind of artisan, one whose days were spent not in tending sweetness, but in protecting it. His name was Vasu, and he was the rat catcher. Vasu was a man of keen eyes and nimble hands, his movements precise and economical, like the spring of a well-oiled trap. His face, weathered by sun and sharpened by constant observation, often wore a look of quiet intensity, as if he were always listening, always sensing the unseen movements beneath the floorboards, in the dark corners of the granaries. He was known throughout the villages, from the smallest hamlet nestled by the river to the larger settlements that spread across the rolling hills, for his cunning traps and his deep, almost intuitive knowledge of rodent behavior. His reputation was solid, built on years of diligent work. When the grain stores swelled after a bountiful harvest, threatening to overflow with the golden bounty of the earth, it was Vasu who stood guard, a silent sentinel against the creeping threat of gnawing teeth and whiskered greed. He kept the precious grain safe, protecting the livelihoods of families, ensuring that the fruits of their labor would endure through the lean months. He was, in his own quiet way, a protector, a guardian of sustenance, a man whose craft brought a deep, practical peace to his community. He knew the ways of the rats as intimately as a shepherd knew his flock. He understood their paths, their habits, their cunning instincts. He could tell by the faint scratch on a wooden beam, or the subtle shift in a pile of sacks, exactly where they would emerge, where they would seek their hidden meals. His traps were marvels of simple engineering, crafted from local wood and twine, often baited with a tiny morsel of cheese or sweet fruit, irresistible to the small creatures. He would set them with a deliberate, almost ritualistic care, placing them just so, anticipating the rat's next move, always one step ahead. And each morning he would return to his traps, his heart often heavy, to find his predictions fulfilled. The traps, silent and unmoving through the night, would hold their tiny captives, their frantic struggles now stilled. Vasu would then perform the necessary task, efficiently and without malice, for it was simply the way of things, the balance he maintained in the silent covenant between man and the wild. He was a master of his craft, respected, needed, and deeply skilled. Yet, despite his undisputed competence, despite the quiet gratitude of the villagers and the essential nature of his work, a profound sense of entrapment had begun to settle over Vasu. It was a feeling that seeped into his bones, a subtle but pervasive unease that mirrored the very conditions he imposed on the creatures he sought to control. He felt, increasingly, that he was caught in the very cycles he set for others, that his own life was dictated by the endless chase, the constant vigilance. He would walk the paths between the granaries, his eyes scanning for signs, his mind alert to every rustle and shadow, and he would feel a strange kinship with the very creatures he pursued. Were they not also caught in a relentless cycle, a cycle of hunger, of fear, of seeking, always seeking sustenance and safety? And was he not, in his own way, caught in a similar snare? His days were a ceaseless rhythm of setting traps, checking traps, resetting traps. His nights were often restless, his mind replaying the subtle signs he had seen, planning the next placement, anticipating the next move. He would watch the rats sometimes, before they stumbled into his snares. He would see their quick, darting movements, their endless quest for survival, their desperate attempts to find an opening, a way through the obstacles. And he would see in their eyes a mirror of his own weariness, a longing for something more than the constant struggle. He felt like a prisoner of his own making, a keeper of cages who was, in truth, living in a larger, invisible cage himself. The freedom he offered the villagers, freedom from infestation, freedom from hunger, felt like a bitter irony, for he himself felt a deep, nagging lack of it. This feeling, this quiet discord, began to manifest in subtle ways. He started to experiment, not just with the efficiency of his traps, but with their very nature. He tried different designs, not just to catch more effectively, but to understand if there was a way to catch without harming, a way to control without ending. He spent hours in his small workshop, honing edges, adjusting springs, carving new mechanisms, seeking a gentler solution. He tried traps that would simply enclose, holding the rat without injury, allowing him to release it far away in the deep forest, far from the village stores. These relocation attempts were arduous, carrying the small, terrified creatures miles away, releasing them into unfamiliar territory, watching them scurry into the undergrowth, only to wonder if they would simply find their way back, or if another would take their place. The cycle felt endless, like an unknotting of one thread, only to find another tangle. The effort was immense, the results uncertain, and the quiet sense of being bound, of being trapped in the very definition of his role, persisted. On some nights, the weight of his vigilance became almost unbearable. After setting his traps for the evening, as the moon cast long silver shadows across the village, Vasu would sometimes do something unheard of for a rat catcher. He would go back, not to check his traps, but to a secluded corner of the granary, a place he knew the rats frequented, a place where they felt safe, if only for a moment. And there, with a quiet, almost apologetic gesture, he would leave a small offering of grain, a handful of wheat, a few kernels of corn, placed carefully on a flat stone. He knew it was counterintuitive, perhaps even foolish. He was feeding the very creatures he was paid to control, to eliminate. But in those moments, under the silent gaze of the moon, he wasn't thinking as the village rat catcher. He was thinking as Vasu, the man who felt caught, the man who yearned for a freedom that always seemed just out of reach. He hoped, perhaps, that by offering a brief respite, a moment of unearned abundance, he might understand something more about the nature of seeking, about the desire for release. He would leave the grain and then retreat, watching from a distance, hidden in the shadows. He would observe the cautious approach of the small creatures, their twitching noses, their wary eyes as they discovered the unexpected bounty. He would watch them eat, quickly, efficiently, and then disappear back into the darkness, leaving only the empty stone. These small, illicit acts of generosity brought him no lasting peace, no true solace. The next morning, the traps would still hold their captives. The cycle would continue, and the quiet weariness in Vasu's heart would remain. The offering of grain was a whisper, a desperate plea for understanding, a symbolic act of defiance against the very strictures of his own life. But the freedom he sought, the liberation from the endless chase, the constant vigilance, remained elusive, a silent echo in the deep, dark corners of his own making. He was the master of traps, but he was also, in a profound and unspoken way, a captive in his own design, waiting for a key he could not quite fashion. The offerings of grain, those quiet acts of defiance against his own purpose, brought him no lasting peace, no true solace. Each morning, the traps would still hold their captives, the relentless cycle would continue, and the quiet weariness in Vasu's heart would remain, a persistent ache. The freedom he sought, the liberation from the endless chase, the constant vigilance, remained elusive, a silent echo in the deep, dark corners of his own making. He was the master of traps, but he was also, in a profound and unspoken way, a captive in his own design, waiting for a key he could not quite fashion. One night, the moon hung full and heavy in the sky, casting the village in stark silver and deep, inky shadows. A subtle breeze rustled through the thatch roofs, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Vasu, unable to sleep, found himself drawn from his humble dwelling. His mind, restless as always, pulled him towards the granaries, towards the familiar pathways where he had laid his traps with such meticulous care earlier that evening. He moved silently, his steps light, almost imperceptible on the soft earth. His eyes, honed by years of nocturnal observation, scanned the familiar landscape of stacked sacks and shadowed corners. There was a particular trap, one of his finest, a cunning design he had perfected over many seasons. It was crafted from dark, aged wood, almost invisible in the dim light, and its mechanism was so precise, so swift, that escape, once triggered, was considered impossible. Tonight, something drew him to it, a subtle premonition, a quiet pull that whispered of an unfolding story. He settled into a hidden nook, a place where the shadows deepened and allowed him to watch unseen, a place he often used to observe the rats before they knew he was near. He waited, his breath held, his senses alive to the quiet pulse of the night. The minutes stretched, slow and deliberate, marked only by the soft chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, a flicker of movement. A small, dark shape emerged from behind a pile of grain sacks, its whiskers twitching, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. It was a rat, larger than most, with a quick, intelligent gaze that seemed to miss nothing. This was a creature of singular cunning, one that Vasu had observed before, one that had evaded his traps on several occasions, a ghost of a shadow that always seemed just out of reach, a worthy adversary in its own small, desperate way. The rat moved with an almost arrogant confidence, a master of its own shadowed domain. It paused, sniffing the air, its head cocked, as if weighing the unseen currents of the night. Then, with a sudden, darting movement, it approached Vasu's finest trap, drawn by the irresistible scent of a tiny piece of dried fig, a delicacy he rarely used. In a flash, the trap sprung. A soft, muffled click broke the silence, and the small creature was caught. Vasu watched, his heart tightening in his chest, a strange mix of professional satisfaction and a deeper, unsettling dread. This was the moment he had anticipated, the fulfillment of his craft, yet tonight it felt different. The rat struggled, not with the usual frantic, mindless thrashing, but with a fierce, concentrated energy. It pulled, It twisted, its small claws scraping against the wood, its body contorting in a desperate dance of attempted escape. Its eyes, bright with a primal terror, darted about, searching for an opening, a weakness, any path to freedom. Vasu, hidden in the shadows, watched its every move, mesmerized by the intensity of its will. The struggle was prolonged, more relentless than any he had witnessed before. The rat pulled against the unyielding mechanism, its body straining, its small teeth gnawing furiously at the hard wood of the trap, then at its own limb. A soft, rasping sound, barely audible above the night's quiet symphony, reached Vasu's ears. It was a sound of immense effort, of profound desperation. And then Vasu saw it, an act so stark, so utterly shocking in its raw, uncompromising nature that it froze him in the dappled moonlight. The rat, rather than succumbing to its fate, rather than waiting for the inevitable end, began to chew. Not at the trap, not at the wood, but at its own leg, the limb that held it captive. It was a slow, deliberate act, born of an absolute, unyielding will to be free. The small creature worked with a chilling focus, its teeth tearing at its own flesh, severing sinew and muscle with a terrifying resolve. Vasu watched, a cold tremor running through him, a profound horror mingling with an equally profound, albeit unsettling, admiration. He saw the pain, the terrible agony, but he also saw the unshakable determination, the absolute commitment to a single solitary goal: liberation. Finally, with a last wrenching effort, the limb was severed. A tiny, wet sound, almost swallowed by the night, and then the rat was free. It lay for a moment, panting, its small body trembling, its remaining 3 legs splayed beneath it. Then, with a raw, terrifying act of self-sacrifice, it gathered itself, limped away from the trap, leaving a small, dark offering of flesh behind, and disappeared into the profound, sheltering darkness of the granary, truly free. Vasu remained hidden, utterly still, long after the rat had vanished. The image burned in his mind. The small creature, its body broken, its will unbroken, choosing a terrible, agonizing freedom over the slow, certain demise within the trap. The empty trap lay before him, a silent testament to an act of radical, desperate liberation. A chilling clarity began to settle over Vasu, a truth that resonated deep within his own trapped heart. He had always yearned for freedom, for release from the endless cycles of his work, from the constant vigilance that defined his life. He had sought it in gentler traps, in relocation, in illicit offerings of grain, but he had sought it gently, softly, without truly understanding the true, profound, and sometimes terrifying cost. He understood now. Freedom, true freedom, was not always a gentle unfolding, a quiet release. Sometimes, to escape a trap, to break free from the cycles that held one captive, one must be willing to sacrifice a part of oneself. Not a physical limb, perhaps, but something equally deeply ingrained, a long-held habit, a comfort, a familiar pattern of thought, a defining aspect of one's identity, something that felt as essential as a part of one's own body. The rat had chosen to lose a part of itself to gain its freedom. It had chosen a wounded, imperfect liberation over a whole, trapped existence. And in that moment, Vasu saw his own predicament with new, stark eyes. He had been so afraid of losing anything, so desperate to hold on to his comforts, his routines, his very definition as the village rat catcher, that he had never truly considered the possibility that freedom might demand such a radical, painful severance. The constant chase, the endless vigilance, the quiet weariness, these were his traps. And perhaps, to escape them, he would need to be willing to give up something equally fundamental, something that felt like a part of his very being. The thought was terrifying, unsettling in its implication, yet it also carried a strange, somber spark of hope. He looked at the empty trap, then at the small, dark offering on the ground. It was a brutal lesson, a raw teaching, delivered not by words, but by a desperate act of life itself. The path to liberation, he realized, was not always through finding an easy escape or a gentler method. Sometimes it was through the willingness to endure a profound, self-inflicted wound, to let go of what felt essential, to sacrifice a part of oneself for the terrible, beautiful prize of true, unburdened freedom. Vasu stood there for a long time, the moon slowly tracing its arc across the sky, his mind unraveling and reweaving the threads of his understanding. He didn't know what he would sacrifice, or how, or when, but he knew, with a chilling clarity that settled deep in his bones, that the key to his own cage was not to be found outside, but within, and that it might demand a price he had never dared to imagine. The quiet weariness in his heart was still there, but now it was tinged with a new, profound gravity, a nascent understanding of the terrible, powerful choice that lay before him. The sun rose again, as it always did, warming the quiet villages and scattering the long shadows of the night. Where one journey of stark realization ended, another began, equally profound in its gentle unfolding. In a small stone workshop, nestled amidst fragrant herb gardens and ancient trees, lived Maya. She was an incense maker, her hands as skilled in the delicate art of blending as a painter's with colors or a musician's with notes. For years, Maya had dedicated her life to the sacred craft, knowing the ancient recipes by heart, the precise measures of resin, the subtle balance of herbs and spices. Her days were spent grinding frankincense into fine powder, sifting sandalwood through silk cloths, and carefully layering cedar and myrrh, creating blends that were said to please specific deities in the temple, carrying the fervent prayers of the villagers heavenward. Maya believed deeply in the power of her craft. She believed that the fragrant smoke, rising in graceful tendrils, was a direct pathway, a silent messenger carrying the hopes and fears, the gratitude and the longing of humanity, upwards to the divine. And just as she crafted these aromatic messages for others, she also poured her own heart into them, embedding her most earnest prayers, her deepest questions, into the very essence of the incense she made. She dedicated her life to sending these prayers upwards, her own fervent requests rising like smoke, hoping to connect, to be heard, to receive some sign, some guidance, some clear answer to the quiet yearning of her soul. Yet, despite her unwavering dedication, despite the meticulous precision of her blends, Maya felt profoundly unheard. Her own prayers, it seemed, brought no clear answers, no comforting whispers from the heavens. Instead, a quiet despair had begun to settle in her heart, a subtle ache of spiritual longing that remained unquenched. She watched the smoke rise, dissipate into the vastness of the sky, and wondered if her own pleas simply vanished into that same boundless, silent emptiness, never truly reaching their intended destination. She tried new mixtures, seeking a blend that might carry her intentions with greater potency. She experimented with rare, imported resins, with ancient, forgotten herbs, hoping to unlock a secret vibration, a hidden frequency that would finally make her voice resonate in the celestial realms. She prayed at different times of the day, with the first light of dawn, under the harsh glare of noon, and beneath the silent tapestry of the stars, believing that perhaps the timing held the key. She even visited various temples, journeying to distant shrines known for their potent energies, offering her finest incense, her deepest devotions, always seeking a divine response, a tangible sign that her efforts were not in vain, that her spirit was not adrift and alone in its seeking. But the silence persisted. The answers remained elusive. The quiet despair, though never loud or demanding, deepened its hold, a constant undercurrent beneath the surface of her diligent, outwardly devout life. She continued her work, her hands moving with practiced grace, but her heart was heavy with the burden of unreceived messages, of a connection yearned for, but never quite found. She felt as though she was perpetually sending letters into a cosmic void, with no return address, no confirmation of receipt, no gentle reply. One quiet morning, the air still cool and fresh from the night, Maya rose before the first stirrings of the village. The sun had not yet fully crested the eastern hills, and the world was bathed in that soft, pre-dawn luminescence, a time when the veil between worlds felt thinnest. She entered her workshop, the familiar scent of dried herbs and sweet resins already lingering in the air, a comforting, familiar embrace. But this morning, something was different. Perhaps it was the profound quiet that permeated the space, a silence so deep it seemed to hum. Or perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion from her relentless seeking, a weariness that had finally quieted the incessant chatter of her hopeful, yearning mind. Without conscious thought, without setting an intention, without even formulating a single prayer, she began to make incense. Not a special blend for a deity, not a desperate plea for an answer, but simply, purely, for the act of making itself. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each gesture steeped in the quiet reverence of habit. She reached for the frankincense, its rough, golden tears gleaming softly in the dim light. As she crushed it with her mortar and pestle, a faint, earthy aroma began to unfurl, a grounding scent, ancient and resonant, speaking of deep roots and timeless earth. She did not think of its purpose or its destination, or the prayers it might carry. She simply smelled it, truly smelled it. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the fragrance to fill her senses, distinguishing the subtle nuances within its familiar earthiness. A hint of pine, a whisper of warm soil, a memory of distant, arid lands. It was not a message upward, but a presence inward, a quiet revelation in the very air she breathed. Next, she took the sweet sandalwood. As her hands worked, grating the creamy wood into a fine, fragrant powder, she inhaled its gentle, woody sweetness. It was a scent that always spoke of peace, of calm temples and quiet contemplation. But today, it was more. It was the scent of the tree itself, of its slow growth, its absorption of sunlight and rain, its patient transformation into something so exquisitely beautiful. She felt the coolness of the powder on her fingertips, the slight resistance of the wood under her touch, and the sweetness of its essence filled her, not as a symbol, but as a pure, unadorned experience. Then came the sharp cedar, its aroma cutting through the air with a clean, invigorating clarity. It was the scent of strength, of towering trees that defied storms, of resilient life. As she prepared it, the crisp, almost bracing notes awakened something within her, a fresh perspective. She noted the sharpness, yes, but also the underlying warmth, the faint, comforting familiarity that spoke of hearth and home, of protection and steadfastness. She continued, mixing each ingredient with an unprecedented attention, not to the final blend or the deity it would honor, or the prayer it would carry, but to the individual essence of each component. The delicate jasmine, the spicy cinnamon, the bitter aloes wood, each one presented itself to her, not as a means to an end, but as a complete, sacred entity in itself. In that profound silence, without a single word of prayer escaping her lips, without a single thought of sending messages upward, a quiet realization began to bloom within Maya's heart. She had been so consumed with the act of communication, so focused on directing her intentions outward, on sending messages upward into the heavens, that she had utterly missed the sacred essence that was already here. It was not far away, not in some distant, unreachable realm, but present, profoundly present. It was in the very earth beneath her hands, in the rich, vibrant life force of the plants and trees from which these precious resins and herbs were gathered. It was in the subtle beauty of her craft itself, in the careful grinding, the precise sifting, the gentle blending. The sacred was not an abstract concept to be reached through ethereal smoke, but a tangible reality, breathing and alive, right there, in the quiet, fragrant dust on her workbench. The answers she had so desperately sought, the connection she had yearned for, were not to be found in a reply from above, but in the simple act of truly being present with what was already around her. The silent messages she had sent were not unheard. They had simply been misdirected. The divine was not only in the heavens, but also in the humble, earthy materials she held, in the very air she breathed, in the quiet rhythm of her own dedicated hands. A profound peace settled over Maya, a peace deeper and more comforting than any answer she had ever hoped to receive. She looked at the small, growing pile of freshly blended incense, its aroma a complex symphony of earthy, sweet, and sharp notes. For the first time, she saw it not as a vehicle for a prayer, but as a prayer in itself, a silent offering of presence, a fragrant hymn of pure, unadulterated being. The sacred was not something to be sought, but something to be recognized, felt, and honored in the very fabric of existence. She had spent her life sending messages away, only to discover that the deepest wisdom, the most profound connection, was always waiting, quietly present, right here, beneath her own patient, incense-stained hands. Ranjan was a renowned well-digger, known throughout the land for his uncanny ability to discern the hidden veins of water beneath the earth. His hands were strong, his back accustomed to the tireless labor, and his eyes held a quiet, knowing gaze that seemed to pierce through the solid ground. When Ranjan pointed to a spot and said, "Here," villagers knew to trust him, and time and again his wisdom proved true. He found abundant, life-giving water for countless communities, quenching the physical thirst of many, bringing relief and sustenance to parched fields and weary souls. Yet, for all the deep, clear water he brought to others, Ranjan himself felt a profound, spiritual parchness. It was a thirst that no physical water could ever touch, a longing for a source that would quench a deeper, inner dry spell within his own spirit. He would stand by the gushing wells he had brought forth, watching the villagers fill their pots, their faces alight with gratitude, and a quiet ache would settle in his own heart. He had provided so much, yet felt so empty himself. He tried to locate this inner source with the same meticulous dedication he applied to his craft. He would dig in new, unexplored locations, hoping that a change of scenery might reveal a different kind of truth. He would go deeper, beyond the usual water tables, convinced that his spiritual wellspring must lie at an unprecedented depth, hidden from casual discovery. He even consulted other water finders, revered elders whose senses were said to be attuned to more than just the earth's dampness, seeking their guidance, their wisdom, their secret knowledge. But always, he found only water, physical, tangible, refreshing water for the body, never the profound, lasting satisfaction, the quenching of his deeper thirst that he craved. The work, once a source of quiet pride, now felt like a constant reminder of his own inner lack, his own spiritual aridity. Each swing of his pickaxe, each shovelful of earth he moved, felt like an effort in futility when it came to his own heart. He saw the shimmering surface of the water he unearthed, and it mocked him with its abundance, an abundance he could offer to all but himself. The sun beat down, the dust rose, and his body grew weary. But it was the weariness of his spirit that truly burdened him, a silent, persistent drought that no amount of searching seemed to alleviate. He continued his work, for it was his purpose, his calling. But the joy, the deep contentment had receded, leaving behind only the rhythmic motion of labor and the quiet yearning for something more. One arduous day, the sun high and merciless, Ranjan was digging a new well for a small, struggling village nestled in a particularly dry region. He had sensed water there, a subtle whisper beneath the hard, cracked earth, but it was proving unusually elusive. He had dug deeper than ever before, his muscles screaming in protest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The earth was unforgiving, dry and stubborn, offering no hint of moisture. Then, with a jarring thud that vibrated up his arms and into his aching shoulders, his pickaxe struck solid rock. It was a vast, unyielding slab, stretching far beneath the surface, a formidable barrier. Ranjan struck it again, and again, the metallic ring echoing in the deep hole he had carved. The rock did not budge. It seemed to laugh at his efforts, an impenetrable shield protecting whatever lay beneath. He paused, leaning heavily on the handle of his pickaxe, sweat stinging his eyes, his spirit sinking with each fruitless strike. He looked up at the villagers gathered at the edge of the pit, their faces etched with hope, and then, slowly, with growing disappointment. They had put all their trust in him, all their meager resources into this one desperate attempt. "There is no water here, Ranjan," one old woman said, her voice thin with resignation. Others nodded, their shoulders slumping. The children, who had been watching with wide-eyed expectation, now looked down at their dusty feet. But then, the village elder, a man whose face was a map of seasons and wisdom, stepped forward. He looked at Ranjan, not with doubt, but with unwavering trust. "Ranjan," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you have never failed us. Your wisdom is true. If you sensed water here, it is here. You must continue." Other voices rose in agreement, a chorus of faith. "Please, Ranjan," they implored, their hope rekindled by the elder's words. "Do not give up now." Ranjan looked at their faces, at their desperate belief in him. He felt the weight of their trust, a burden and a strange kind of strength all at once. His body was exhausted, his mind clouded with doubt, but their collective faith was like a cool stream, briefly reviving his flagging spirit. He looked down at the unyielding rock, at the seemingly impossible barrier. He could simply stop, declare it a lost cause, and move on. No one would blame him. But the elder's words and the villager's unwavering belief echoed in his mind. "You must continue." He took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the burning in his lungs. He gripped the pickaxe, his knuckles white, and raised it high above his head. This would be it, he thought. One final powerful strike. If the rock held, then he would truly know defeat. If it yielded, he pushed the thought from his mind, focusing all his remaining energy, all his will, into that single, decisive blow. With a grunt that tore from the depths of his being, he brought the pickaxe down. It met the rock with a deafening crack, a sound unlike any he had heard before. It was not the dull thud of failure, nor the sharp clang of metal on stone. It was the sound of something breaking, something profound and ancient giving way. A A tremor ran through the ground beneath his feet. Then, a thin, almost imperceptible crack appeared in the rock, snaking its way across the surface. And from that crack, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, a tiny trickle of water began to seep. It was clear, pure, catching the sunlight like liquid diamonds. Ranjan stared, disbelieving. He dropped his pickaxe and knelt, watching as the trickle grew into a stream, then a steady flow, bubbling up from the heart of the rock. The villagers gasped, then cheered, their cries of joy echoing across the dry landscape. They rushed forward, carefully, reverently, to the edge of the pit, watching the water rise. Ranjan reached out a hand, cupping the cool, fresh liquid. He brought it to his lips, tasting it. It was the sweetest, purest water he had ever encountered in all his years of digging. It was not merely refreshing, it was invigorating, vital, alive. It tasted of the earth's deepest secrets, of patience, of resilience, of an ancient, enduring strength. In that moment, as the pure water filled his mouth and quenched the physical thirst that had parched him throughout the long, hard day, a profound realization dawned within Ranjan. It was not just the water that was pure, but the lesson it carried. He had spent his life seeking the easy path, the visible flow, the superficial satisfaction. But here, beneath the hardest, most resistant barrier he had ever faced, lay the purest, most profound source. The obstacle that had seemed to mock him, the challenge that had threatened to break his spirit, was not a curse, but a guardian. It had protected this precious, vital essence, preserving it until the moment of true perseverance, of unwavering faith, had finally broken through. His spiritual thirst, too, began to recede, not with a gush, but with a quiet, steady seep of understanding. He had sought profound satisfaction in easy answers, in shallower depths. But perhaps, he realized, the source that would quench his deepest inner thirst also lay behind the hardest barriers within himself, the stubborn doubts, the ingrained fears, the resistance to his own truest nature. To find that inner spring, he would have to be willing to strike again and again, with faith and unwavering resolve, at the solid rock of his own deepest challenges. The purest, most profound sources, he now knew, were rarely found on the surface. They were often protected by the very difficulties that made us want to give up, waiting to be discovered by a spirit that refused to be deterred. Ranjan stood, looking at the gushing well, then at the grateful faces of the villagers. He felt a quiet peace settle over him, a sense of having found something far more precious than water that day. He had found a deeper truth, a profound wisdom etched into the very core of the earth, a wisdom that spoke of the immense value hidden behind every challenge, every arduous struggle. He had learned that the path to the purest source, both in the earth and within the spirit, often lay through the hardest rock, demanding not just strength, but an unshakable belief in the unseen. This story shows us that true value and purity often lie behind our greatest challenges. Ranjan discovered that the hardest barriers can protect the purest sources of refreshment, both for the body and for the spirit. Buddhism teaches us that difficulties, or dukkha, are often opportunities for growth and deeper understanding. When we persevere through our challenges, when we do not give up in the face of the seemingly impenetrable, we often find the most profound and lasting peace, a source that truly quenches our deepest thirst. Now, let us take a gentle breath, allowing this wisdom to settle softly within you. Feel the air fill your lungs completely, and then release it slowly, letting go of any tension, any striving. Just breathe and rest. A new day dawns, bringing with it the soft light that filters through the leaves of ancient trees, touching the quiet villages. In one such village, where the scent of warm earth mingled with the faint aroma of herbs, lived a woman named Tara. Her hands, though aged by many seasons, were still remarkably steady, remarkably precise. Tara was a pot mender, a healer of broken vessels, and her craft was born of patience, of meticulous care, and a deep understanding of how things, once fractured, could find wholeness again. For many years, Tara had dedicated herself to this quiet art. She worked with tree resin, gathered from the deepest parts of the forest, resin that hardened like amber, strong and clear. She used fine threads, spun from the toughest fibers, threads that bound and held, creating invisible seams where once there had been gaping cracks. Villagers brought her their most cherished pots, vessels that had been passed down through generations, pots that had seen countless meals, countless gatherings, countless quiet moments of daily life. A chipped rim, a hairline fracture, a piece broken clean away. Tara could mend them all. She would clean the edges with gentle care, apply the warm, sticky resin, and then, with thread, bind the pieces tightly, holding them until the resin set, becoming one with the clay. Her work made broken things hold water once more, made them useful, made them beloved again. Yet, despite her profound ability to heal the vessels of others, a quiet disquiet had settled within Tara's own heart. She felt, deeply and persistently, that she herself was irreparably broken. Her own spirit, she believed, was leaking, slowly draining away, despite all her attempts at self-repair. She would sit in the evenings, after the last pot had been returned to its grateful owner, and reflect on the subtle fractures she felt within herself. A sense of weariness, a lingering sadness, a feeling of inadequacy that no amount of external mending seemed able to touch. She tried to mend herself, much as she mended the pots. She studied new techniques, poring over ancient texts, seeking stronger resins for her own perceived inner cracks. She experimented with different threads of thought, tried to bind her fragmented emotions with tighter self-discipline, with more diligent meditation, with stricter routines. She practiced on her own perceived fractures, attempting to smooth over the rough edges of her disappointments, to fill the empty spaces left by her regrets. But always, the feeling persisted. She remained fragmented, a collection of pieces held together not by strong, clear resin, but by a fragile, almost imperceptible force that threatened to give way at any moment. The mending, for herself, never quite seemed to take. The cracks, though hidden, always remained. One quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across her small workshop, a woman entered, her face etched with worry, her shoulders stooped. She was not a woman of means. Her simple clothes were worn, her hands rough from labor. In her arms, she cradled a clay pot, not a grand vessel, but a humble, everyday pot, one that had clearly seen many, many years of use. It was badly cracked, split down one side. But what caught Tara's eye was not merely the fresh fracture. It was the visible repairs, the intricate lines of golden resin, the delicate patterns of fine thread that crisscrossed its surface, holding the pieces together. The pot had been mended not once, but many times over its long life. Each repair was plain to see, a testament to its long journey. The woman held the pot out, her voice soft, tinged with resignation. "It is broken beyond repair now, isn't it, Tara?" she asked, her eyes downcast. "I have mended it so many times myself, and others before me. But this time, I fear it is truly finished." Tara took the pot gently. Her fingers, accustomed to the smooth coolness of clay and the subtle ridges of mended seams, traced the newest, deepest crack. But then, her gaze lingered on the older repairs. There were lines of dark resin, almost black, from an earlier time, and lines of lighter, almost golden resin from a later mending. Some threads were coarse, others fine, each visible, each telling a story. "It holds water, does it not?" Tara asked, her voice quiet, steady, as she turned the pot carefully in her hands, observing its enduring form. "Yes," the woman replied, a hint of surprise in her tone. "It still holds water, but the cracks, they are so plain to see, so many of them. It is not whole. It is unsightly, perhaps." She hesitated, then added, "It looks like a patchwork, a thing of too many repairs." Tara looked at the pot, then back at the woman's tired face. "And yet," she said, her voice softer still, "you brought it here. You did not discard it. It must mean something to you, this pot, with all its markings." A faint smile touched the woman's lips, a warmth entering her weary eyes. "Oh, it means everything," she said, her voice now imbued with a gentle affection. "It was my grandmother's, then my mother's. It has always been in our home, for as long as I can remember. It has cooked our meals, held our grains, carried water from the well on countless days." She reached out a finger, tracing one of the older, darker mended lines. "My mother. She mended this one herself after my father accidentally dropped it. I remember watching her, so careful, so patient." She pointed to another, a lighter line. "And this one, I mended when my own child, small and clumsy, knocked it from the shelf." Her gaze wandered over the visible repairs, each one a faint echo of a memory. Each crack, each mending, it has a story, doesn't it? Tara listened, her own breath growing quiet, her gaze fixed on the pot. She saw the visible repairs now, not as flaws, not as imperfections, not as marks of brokenness, but as something else entirely. She saw them as lines of life, as pathways of history, as a living map of care and perseverance. Each mended line was a testament to enduring love, to the decision to keep, to cherish, to restore, rather than to discard. The pot was not made less beautiful by its repairs. Rather, it was made unique, made rich with the echoes of hands that had held it, hands that had mended it, hearts that had treasured it through time. The mending had become decoration, an intricate pattern woven into its very being, a visible testament to resilience, to the quiet strength of what had been loved and kept through the long passage of years. Something shifted within Tara, deep in the quiet spaces of her own fragmented spirit. She looked at the pot, truly saw it, perhaps for the first time. She saw the visible repairs, not as shame, but as strength. Not as a sign of being broken, but as a sign of being loved enough to be put back together over and over again. And in that moment, a profound realization dawned. What if her own mended places, her own quiet scars, were not marks of her brokenness, but instead signs of her own endurance? What if her own attempts at self-repair, even those she felt had failed, were in fact weaving a unique pattern into the fabric of her spirit, creating a beauty that was not pristine, not unbroken, but profoundly, resiliently her own? The pot was not whole in the way a new pot was whole, but it was profoundly complete. Its story was etched into its visible repairs, a story of care, of resilience, of love that refused to let go. And in that profound completeness, there was a beauty that a perfect, uncracked pot could never possess. Tara looked at the woman, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Each mending has a story, and sometimes," she continued, her gaze returning to the pot, tracing a finger along a mended seam, "sometimes our repairs become our beauty, not our shame." The woman looked at the pot again, her gaze softening, a new light in her eyes. She looked at the visible repairs, and something in her face shifted. She saw them perhaps for the first time, not as flaws, not as evidence of imperfection, but as the enduring marks of a beloved life. A life that had been cared for, sustained, and treasured. She saw, perhaps, that the mending had woven into the pot a richness, a story, a unique and irreplaceable beauty that only time and love could create. And in that quiet understanding, a quiet peace settled over both women, a shared recognition of the profound wisdom held within a humble, mended pot. This story shows us that our mending and our scars can become a source of beauty and strength. Tara discovered that visible repairs on a treasured pot could be seen not as flaws or shame, but as decoration, as symbols of a life lived, of love endured, of resilience through time. Buddhism teaches us about the interconnectedness of form and emptiness, and how all things are transient and imperfect. Yet within that transience and imperfection, there lies a profound completeness. When we embrace our own mended places, our own quiet scars, we find a unique and profound beauty within ourselves, a beauty born not of an absence of breaks, but of the love and care that brought us back together, time and time again. Now let us take a gentle breath, allowing this wisdom to settle softly within you. Feel the air fill your lungs completely, and then release it slowly, letting go of any tension, any striving. Just breathe and rest. Allow your mind to quiet, feeling the soft rhythm of your breath as it carries you deeper into a place of calm and ease. There is nothing to fix, nothing to mend, nothing to do. Simply be in this quiet, mended moment. Indra, the peacock feather collector, moved with a quiet reverence through the sun-dappled glades where the magnificent birds roamed. Each molting season, he would spend his days patiently searching, his eyes trained to spot the discarded treasures on the forest floor. He would gather the luminous feathers, each one a breathtaking artwork of iridescent greens, blues, and golds, handling them with exquisite care. He knew their patterns, their subtle shifts in color, the way they caught the light. He handled beauty that the birds themselves had simply abandoned, leaving them behind for the earth to reclaim, or for Indra to find. For many years, this work filled him with a quiet satisfaction. To be surrounded by such natural artistry, to gather these jewels of the forest, felt like a sacred duty. But as the seasons turned, a subtle disquiet began to settle in Indra's heart. He felt as though he too was molting, losing his own colors, his own vibrancy, without new ones growing in their place. He held the brilliant feathers in his hands, admiring their splendor, yet felt a hollowness within himself. He was surrounded by beauty, but felt his own inner light dimming, a sense of his own life's brilliance being shed and left behind, unreplenished, as if he were merely a collector of beautiful things, but not beautiful himself. He tried to understand this feeling, to find a way to reignite his own inner radiance. He would try wearing the feathers himself, carefully tucking them into his simple tunic, hoping their brilliance might somehow transfer to him, or at least mask his own perceived fading. He spent hours observing the peacocks, watching their proud strut, their sudden magnificent fanning of tails, hoping to glean some secret of their inherent glory, the source of their undeniable presence. He even, for a time, tried eating the same wild berries and seeds the peacocks favored. thinking perhaps their diet held a key to their vibrant plumage, to the very essence of their striking beauty. But none of it worked. The feathers remained beautiful, the peacocks remained splendid, and Indra remained with his quiet sense of loss, his own colors seeming to fade with each passing year, feeling more like the discarded feather than the living bird. He was a collector of beauty, but felt he possessed none of his own. One golden afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the forest with hues of amber and rose, Indra sat hidden amongst the tall grasses, watching a small group of peacocks. It was mating season, and the males were engaged in their age-old ritual of display, each one vying for attention, fanning their tails with impressive vigor. One magnificent male, with a vast, shimmering tail, fanned his plumage wide, trembling with effort and pride. His iridescent eye spots seemed to gaze directly into the setting sun, a dazzling spectacle. Around him, several drab peahens watched, their colors muted, their forms unassuming. Observing the intricate dance, Indra watched, expecting the most splendid male, the one with the most feathers, the most perfect display to be chosen. But then, his gaze shifted. He noticed one particular peahen, her feathers a soft, unassuming brown, her head tilted, observing not just the grandeur of the fanned tail, not just the sheer number or brilliance of the individual feathers, but something more profound. She watched the way. The peacock held himself, the subtle tremor of his feathers, the proud arch of his neck, the vibrant energy that seemed to emanate from his entire being, from his very core. She was not simply looking at the collected feathers, the physical attributes he possessed. She was observing the magnificent, vibrant display of his living plumage, how he carried and presented what he had, the sheer force of his life energy made visible and offered in that moment. It was not the feathers themselves, beautiful as they were, but the act of their presentation, the living, breathing essence that animated them, that made them truly captivating. In that quiet observation, a profound understanding bloomed within Indra. He saw it with startling clarity. Beauty and true worth wasn't in what one merely collected or possessed, not in the number of luminous feathers one gathered, or even in their individual static brilliance. It was in how one showed, how one lived, what one had within. It was in the vibrant, living display of one's own essence, the way one presented oneself to the world, animated by an inner spirit. The peacock's beauty wasn't just in the feathers he had, but in the magnificent living act of being a peacock, of unfurling his inherent glory, of offering his vibrant presence. And once shed, once separated from that living display, they were just feathers, beautiful, yes, but no longer alive, no longer a display of vibrant being, no longer connected to the animating spirit. Indra looked at the single exquisite feather he held in his hand, a feather he had found that very morning. Its colors shimmered, perfect and unblemished, a tiny masterpiece. He had intended to add it to his collection, to display it with the others, but now he saw it differently. He saw its inherent beauty, yes, but he also saw its separation from the living bird, its quiet stillness, its finished journey. With a gentle motion, he released the feather into the soft evening breeze. It caught the light one last time, a fleeting jewel, then drifted away, carried by the wind into the darkening forest, returning to the earth from which it came. As he watched it disappear, a lightness settled over Indra, a feeling he hadn't known before, a quiet sense of renewal that had nothing to do with collecting and everything to do with simply being. He understood now that his own vibrancy was not something to be found in external things, but something to be lived, to be expressed from the quiet, living core of his own being. His own colors were not lost. They were simply waiting for him to unfurl them, to live them, to display them in the quiet, humble acts of his own life. This story shows us that true beauty and worth are not found in what we merely collect or possess, but in how we present ourselves, how we live and display what we have within. Indra discovered that the peacock's true magnificence lay not in its discarded feathers, but in the vibrant, living display of its plumage, animated by its own inner life force. Buddhism teaches us about the principle of non-attachment, of letting go of the need to possess or cling to external forms. It reminds us that true richness comes from within, from the inherent wisdom and compassion we cultivate, and how we express that in our interaction with the world. When we cease to chase after external validation or accumulation, and instead focus on living authentically, on displaying our true inner nature with grace and presence, we find a profound and lasting beauty that is uniquely our own. We have journeyed together through these quiet crafts, meeting those who walked a path of subtle seeking and found wisdom in the most unexpected places. We met Nakul, the charcoal burner, who learned that passion, like embers, can transform from a visible flame into a steady, enduring heat, less dramatic, but far more lasting and essential. We walked with Priya, the water carrier, who discovered that her perceived losses, the gentle leaks along her path, were in truth acts of nurturing, creating unexpected gardens of life and beauty. Sunil, the flute maker, showed us that emptiness is not a void to be feared, but a spaciousness, an essential condition that allows breath to move and become song. Bhima, the grinding stone maker, taught us that true permanence lies not in lasting forever, but in serving completely, fully, and meaningfully while one can. We saw Sundari, the honey collector's wife, recognize the subtle cost of refinement and the value of keeping a connection to the wild, untamed essence of life. Vasu, the rat catcher, faced the profound and sometimes terrible price of true freedom, understanding that to escape a trap, one must sometimes be willing to sacrifice a part of oneself, an old habit, a long-held comfort. Maya, the incense maker, found sacredness not in sending prayers upward, but in the rich, immediate experience of her craft, present in the very earth beneath her hands, in the subtle beauty of each ingredient. Ranjan, the well digger, broke through the hardest, most resistant barriers to find the purest, most profound sources, teaching us that our greatest challenges often guard our deepest treasures. And Tara, the pot mender, showed us that our mending and our scars are not marks of shame, but symbols of resilience and love, weaving a unique and profound beauty into the fabric of our being. And finally, Indra, the peacock feather collector, reminded us that true beauty and worth are not in what we merely collect or possess, but in how we show, how we live, what we have within, in the vibrant, authentic display of our own precious lives. Each of these journeys, unfolding like a slow breath, has revealed a common thread. What we often perceive as loss or lack or burden can, with a gentle shift in perspective, be seen as a source of strength, beauty, and purpose. We discovered that what seems like depletion can be nourishment. What feels like emptiness can be capacity. What appears as brokenness can hold profound completeness and beauty. All of these teachings point to the gentle wisdom of seeing life as it truly is, ever-changing, interconnected, and inherently perfect in its imperfections. There is no need to grasp, no need to force, no need to be anything other than what you are in this very moment. In your your own life, you may find these insights bloom in the quiet moments, in the simple acts of your day. The deepest truth is often found not in searching far away, not in striving for something external, but in looking closely, with gentle eyes, at what is already here, within the quiet spaces of your own experience. Allow yourself to rest deeply, knowing that wisdom resides within these quiet spaces. Now, let us bring our awareness back to our own bodies. Feel the gentle weight of your limbs resting upon your bed. Allow your shoulders to soften, releasing any tension they might hold. Let your jaw relax, your tongue settle gently in your mouth. There is nothing left to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. You don't need to understand anything more. Simply allow your body to be heavy, supported, and completely at ease. Feel the quiet stillness within you, a deep well of peace. Everything is complete as it is. You are already home. Simply rest. Let go.